Book 4, Chapter 27 of The Mystery of the Hasty Arrow, by Katharine Green. Book 4, Nemesis. From lips long silent. This finishes my usefulness as a detective. I have had my fill of horrors, all, in fact, that my old age can stand. Thus Mr. Gryce, as hours afterwards he and Sweetwater turned their faces back toward New York. "I appreciate your feelings," responded the latter, who had been strangely silent all day, speaking only when directly addressed. "I can assure you that in my way I am as much cut up as you are. I wish now that I had made an attempt from the rear to head off this distracted woman, even if I had been obliged to scratch my hands to pieces tearing a board from the fence. It would have done no good. She was determined to die rather than give up her secret. I remember the look with which her sister-in-law warned me that she would never survive a capture, but I thought that mere exaggeration." Then, after a moment of conscious silence on the part of both, the weary old man added with bitter emphasis, "Her testimony might, I do not say would, have cleared away our suspicions of Director Roberts." Sweetwater, who was acting as chauffeur, slowed down his machine till it came to a standstill at the side of the road. Then, wheeling quietly about till he faced his surprised companion, he remarked very gravely, "Mr. Gryce, I hadn't the heart to tell you this before, but the time has come for you to know that Mr. Roberts' cause is not so favorably affected as you seem to think by the suicidal death of one who without doubt would have proved to be a leading witness against him. I am sure you will agree with me in this when I inform you that in pursuing the task you set me, I came upon this." Thrusting his hand into his pocket, he pulled out a large envelope from which he proceeded to draw forth first the tattered square of what had once been a cabinet portrait, and then a freshly printed proof of the same. Holding them both up, he waited for the word that was sure to follow. It came with all the emphasis he expected. "Roberts! Director Roberts?" "The same, sir," and the eyes of the two detectives met in what was certainly one of the most solemn moments of their lives. They had paused for this short conference at a point where the road, running for a few yards on a level, gave them a view of slope on slope of varying verdure, with glimpses of the Hudson between. Glancing up, with a gesture of manifest shrinking from the portrait which Sweetwater still held, Mr. Gryce allowed his glance to run over the wonderful landscape laid out to his view, and said, with breaks and halts bespeaking his deep emotion, "If my death here and now, following fast upon that of this unhappy Frenchwoman, would avail to wipe out the evidence I have so laboriously collected against this man, I should welcome it with gratitude. I shrink from ending my career with the shattering of so fine an image in the public eye. What lies back of this crime? What past memories or present miseries have led to an act which would be called dastardly in the most uninstructed and basest of our sex? I lack the imagination to conceive. Would to God I had never tried to find out. But no man standing where Roberts does today, among the leaders of a great party, can fall into such a pit of shame without weakening the faith of the young and making a travesty of virtue and honor. Yet if he is guilty, it is our business to pursue him to the end. Only I like the man, Sweetwater. I had a long talk with him yesterday on indifferent matters, and I came away liking him." This was certainly something Sweetwater had not expected to hear, and it threw him again into silence as he started up the machine and they pursued their course home. Hard as the day had been for Mr. Gryce, its trials were not yet over. He had left it to Sweetwater to report the case to the New York authorities, and had gone home to rest from the shock of the occurrence and to prepare for that interview with the Chief Inspector, which he was satisfied would now lead to even a more exacting one with the District Attorney. He was met by a messenger from downtown who handed him a letter. He opened it abstractedly and read the following: Mrs. Taylor is talking. He had forgotten Mrs. Taylor. To have her thus brought forcibly back to mind was a shock heightened rather than diminished by a perusal of the few connected words which the careful nurse had transcribed as falling from her delirious patient's lips. They were these: I love but thee, and thee I will love to eternity. The exact lines, no more, no less, which Sweetwater had found written on the back of the Swiss clock cherished by Mr. Roberts. End of chapter 27. Romantic, too romantic. Part 1. Next morning Mr. Gryce left his home an hour earlier than usual. He wished to have a talk with Mrs. Taylor's nurse before encountering the Inspector. It was an inconvenient time for the nurse to leave the sick bed, but the matter being so important, she was prevailed upon to give him a few moments in the little reception room where he had seated himself. The result was meager, that is, from her standpoint. All she had to add to what she had written him the day before was the fact that the 2 lines of verse quoted in the note she had sent him were Mrs. Taylor's first coherent utterance, and that they had been spoken not only once but many times, in every kind of tone and with ever varying emphasis. That, and a dreamy request for the papers, which had followed some action of her own this very morning, comprised all that she had to give in fulfillment of the promise she had made him at the beginning of this illness. Mr. Gryce believed her, and rose reluctantly to his feet. Then she is still very ill? Very ill, but mending daily, or so the doctor says. If she talks again, as she is liable to do at any moment, do not check her, but remember every word. The importance of this I cannot impress upon you too fully, but do not by any show of curiosity endanger her recovery. She seems to be one of the very best sort. I would not have her body or mind sacrificed on my account. You may trust me, sir. He nodded, giving her his hand. But as he was turning away, he looked back with the quiet remark, I should like to ask a final question. You have been in constant attendance on this lady for some time, and must have seen many of her friends, as well as taken charge of her mail and of any messages which may have been left for her. Has there been anything in this experience to settle the doubt as to whether her talk of a vision in which she saw her absent husband stricken simultaneously with the poor child lying at that very moment dead at her feet, simply delirium, or a striking instance of telepathy recording an accomplished fact? In other words, do you believe her husband to be living or not living at the present time? That is a subject on which I have not been able to form any opinion. I have heard nothing, seen nothing to influence my mind either way. Some other people have asked me the same question. If her mail contains any news, it is still in the hands of the proprietor of the hotel. He has refrained from sending it up. She has lived here, as you know, for a long while. Has she no relative to share your watch or take such things in charge? I have seen none. Friends she has in plenty, but no one who claims relationship with her or who raises the least objection to anything I do. He seemed about to ask another question, but refrained, and allowed her to depart after some final injunction as to what she should do in case of certain emergencies. Then he had a talk with the proprietor, which added little or nothing to his present knowledge, and these duties off his mind, he went downtown. As he expected, he found the Chief Inspector awaiting him. The death of Madame Duclos had added still another serious complication to the many with which this difficult affair was already encumbered, and he was anxious to talk over the matter with one who had been on the spot and upon whose impressions he consequently could rely. But when he heard all that Mr. Gryce had to say on the subject, he grew as serious as the detective himself could wish, even going so far as to propose an immediate ride over to the district attorney's office. Fortunately, they found that gentleman in and ready to listen, though it was evident that he expected little from the conference. But his temper changed as Mr. Gryce opened up his theory and began to substantiate it with facts. The looks which he exchanged with the Chief Inspector grew more and more earnest and inquiring, and when Mr. Gryce reached that portion of his report which connected Mr. Roberts so indisputably with the Arrow, he called in his assistant, and together they listened to what Mr. Gryce had further to say. With this addition to his audience, the old man's manner changed and became a trifle more formal. He related the fact, not generally known, of Mr. Roberts' engagement to a young girl residing on Long Island, and how this was broken off immediately after the occurrence at the museum, seemingly for no other reason than the unhappy condition of mind in which he found himself, a condition added to, if not explained, by the pertinacity with which he had haunted the morgue and dwelt upon the image of the young girl who had perished under no random shot. Here the old man paused, shrinking as much from what he had yet to say as they from the hearing of it. It was not till the Chief Inspector had made him an encouraging gesture that he found the requisite courage to proceed. He did so in these words: "I know that the evidence I have thus far advanced is of a purely circumstantial nature, capable, perhaps, of a more or less satisfactory explanation. But what I have to add cannot be so easily disposed of. Connections have been developed between persons we thought strangers, which have opened up a field of inquiry which brings the doubts and surmises of an old detective within the scope of this office. I do not know what to make of them. Perhaps their full meaning can only be found out here. Of this only I am assured. The gentleman whom it seems presumptuous on my part to connect even in a casual way with crime has not gained but lost but what I have to tell of Madame Duclos' suicidal death. To those who see no association between the two, it looks like the opening of a new lead. But when I tell you that they knew each other, or at all events she knew him, and in the way of actual hatred, it looks more like a deepening of the old one. See here, gentlemen." Opening a package he had hitherto held in his hand, he showed them the Fredericks' 15-year-old photograph of Mr. Roberts, together with its mutilated counterpart, and explained how the latter came to be in its present mutilated condition. "But this is not all," he continued, as the remarks incident upon this proof of deadly hatred on the part of the mother of the victim for the man whom circumstances seemed to point out as her slayer subsided under the pressure of their interest in what he had further to impart. As you will see after a moment's consideration, this token of animosity does not explain Madame Duclos' flight, and certainly not her death, which, as the unhappy witness of it, I am ready to declare, was not the death of one driven to extremity from personal fear, but by some exalted feeling which we have yet to understand. All that I now wish to point out in its connection is the proof offered by this shattered photograph that Mr. Roberts was in some manner and from some cause a party to this crime from which a superficial observation would completely disassociate him. Where is the connecting link? How can we hope to establish it? That is what has now become my unfortunate duty to make plain to you. Carleton Roberts drawing a bow to shoot an innocent schoolgirl is incredible. In spite of all I have said and shown you, I do not believe him guilty of so inhumane an act. He drew the bow, he shot the arrow, but here allow me to pause a moment to present another aspect of the case as surprising as any you have yet heard. You are aware, as we all are aware, that the inquest we await has been held back for the purpose of giving Mrs. Taylor an opportunity to recover from the illness into which she has been thrown by what she saw and suffered that day. Gentlemen, this Mrs. Taylor, whom we all, I will not even exclude myself from this category, regarded not only as a casual visitor to the museum, but a stranger to all concerned, is, on the contrary, as I think you will soon see, more closely allied to the seemingly dispassionate director than even Madame Duclos. The shock which laid her low was not that usually ascribed to her, or even the one she so fantastically offered to our acceptance, but the recognition of Carleton Roberts as the author of this tragedy, Carleton Roberts, whom she not only knew well, but had loved in days gone by as sincerely as he had loved her. This I now propose to prove to you by what I cannot but regard as incontestable evidence. Taking from a small portfolio, which he carried another photograph, unmounted this time, and evidently the work of an amateur, he laid it out before them. The silence with which his last statement had been received, the kind of silence which covers emotions too deep for audible expression, remained unbroken save for an involuntary murmur or so, as the district attorney and his assistant bent over this crude presentation of something, they hardly knew what, which this old but trusted detective was offering them in substantiation of the well-nigh unbelievable statement he had just made. This, gentlemen, he went on, as he pointed to the following, is the copy of a label pasted on the back of a certain Swiss clock to be seen at this very moment on the wall of Mr. Roberts' own bedroom in his home in Belport, Long Island. He prizes this clock. He has been heard to say that it goes where he goes and stays where he stays, and as it is as far from a valuable one, either from intrinsic worth or from any accuracy in its displays in keeping time, the reason for this partiality must lie in old associations and the memories they invoke. A love token. Can you not see that it is such from the couplet scrawled across it? If not, just take a look at the initials appended to that couplet. May I ask you to read them? The district attorney stooped, adjusted his glasses, and slowly read out C.C.R. Carleton Clifton Roberts, explained Mr. Gryce. Then slowly, the other two, if you will be so good. E.T. Ermentrude Taylor, declared the inexorable voice, and written by herself. Here is her signature which I have obtained, and here is his. Compare them at your leisure with their initials inscribed according to the date there, 16 years or more ago. Now where were these two, this man and this woman, at the time just designated, alone or together? Let us see if we can find out, pursued the detective, with a quiet ignoring of the effect he had just produced, which revealed him as the master of a situation probably as difficult and disconcerting as the three officials hanging in manifest anxiety upon his words had ever been called upon to face. Mr. Roberts was in Switzerland, as his housekeeper will be obliged to admit on oath, she being an honest woman and a domestic in his mother's house at the time. And Ermentrude Taylor? I have a witness to prove where she was also, a witness I shall be glad to have you interrogate. Here is her name and address," and he slipped a small scrap of paper into the District Attorney's hand. "What she will say is this, for I think I have very thoroughly sounded her. First, that she is Mrs. Taylor's most intimate friend. This is conceded by all who know her. Secondly, that while her intimacy does not extend back to their girlhood days, Mrs. Taylor, being an Englishwoman by birth, and remarkably reticent as to her former life and experiences, she has one story to tell of that time which answers the question I have given you. She got it from Mrs. Taylor herself, and in this manner. They were engaged in talking one day about our western mountains and the grandeur of scenery generally, when Mrs. Taylor let fall some remark about the Alps, which led this friend of hers to ask if she had ever seen them. Mrs. Taylor answered in the affirmative, but with such embarrassment and abrupt change of subject that it was plainly apparent she had no wish to discuss it. Indeed, her abruptness was so marked, and her show of trouble so great, that she herself was disturbed by what might very easily give offence, and being of a kindly, even loving disposition, took occasion when next they met to explain that it was as a girl she had visited Switzerland, and that her experiences there had been so unfortunate that any allusion which recalled those days distressed her. That is all that ever passed between these two on this subject, but it is not enough when we read this couplet, and mark the combined initials, and recognize them as those of Carleton Roberts and Ermentrude Taylor. But lest you should doubt even this evidence of an old-time friendship, so intimate that it has almost the look of a betrothal, I must add one more item of corroborative fact which came to me as late as last night. In a moment of partial consciousness, while the nurse hung over her bed, Mrs. Taylor spoke her first coherent sentence since she fell into a state demanding medical assistance. And what was that sentence? A repetition of this couplet, gentlemen, spoken not once, but over and over again, till even the nurse grew tired of listening to it. "I love but thee, and thee I will love to eternity." As the last word fell from Mr. Gryce's lips, the District Attorney muttered a quick exclamation and sat down heavily in his chair. "No coincidence that," he cried with forced vivacity. "The couplet is too little known." "Exactly," came from Mr. Gryce in dry confirmation. "Mrs. Taylor, as well as her friend can judge, is a woman of 35 or 38. If she went on to Switzerland as a girl, this would make her visit coincident, so far as we can calculate from our present knowledge, with that of Carleton Roberts. For the surer advancement of our argument, let us say that it was. What follows? Let the inscription of this label speak for us. They met, they loved, as was natural when we remember the youth and good looks of both, and they parted. This we must concede, or how could the experience have been one she could not recall without a heartbreak? They parted, and he returned home to marry within the year, while she, I do not think she married, though I have no doubt she looks upon herself as a wife and forever bound to the man who deserted her. Women of her kind think in this way of such matters, and act upon them too, as if shown by the fact that on following him here, she passed herself off as a woman separated from her husband, changing the Miss before her name to Mrs. She lived under this assumption for 12 years at her present hotel. In all that time, so far as I can learn, she has never been visited by anyone of an appearance answering to that of her former lover, nor have I any reason to think she ever intruded herself on him, or made herself in any way obnoxious. He was married and settled, and contrary to the usual course of men who step with one stride into affluence, was living a life of usefulness which was rapidly making him a marked man in public esteem. Perhaps she had no right to meddle with what no longer concerned her. At all events, there is no evidence of her having done so in all these 14 years. Even after Mrs. Roberts' death, all went on as usual. But here Mr. Gryce became emphatic, when he turned his attention to a second marriage, and that with a very young girl. I can name her to you, gentlemen, if you wish. Her patient soul may have been roused. She may have troubled him with importunities, may have threatened him with a scandal which would have interfered greatly with his political hopes if it had not ended them at once. I can conceive of such an end to her long patience. Can't you, gentlemen? And what is more, if this were so, and the gentleman found the situation intolerable, it might account for the flight of that arrow as nothing else ever will. End of chapter 28, part 1. Romantic, too romantic, part 2. Both men had started to their feet. How? It was not she who was struck, but it was she who was aimed at. The young girl merely got in the way. But before I enlarge upon this point, he continued in lower tones, as the two officials slowly reseated themselves, allow me to admit that any proof of correspondence between these old-time lovers would have added much to my present argument. But while I have no doubt that such an interchange of letters took place, and that in all probability some one or more of them still exist, Mrs. Taylor's illness and Mr. Roberts' high position prevent any substantiation of the same on our part. I must therefore ask you to assume that it was in obedience to some definite agreement between them that she came to the museum on that fatal morning and made her appearance in that especial section of the gallery marked II. If this strikes you as inconceivable and too presumptuous for belief, you must at least concede that we have ample proof of his entire readiness for her coming. The bow brought up so many days before from the cellar was within reach, the arrow under his coat, and his place of concealment so chosen as to make his escape feasible the moment that arrow flew from the bow. Had she entered that section alone, had the arrow found lodgment in her breast instead of in that of another, nay, I will go even further and say that had no cry followed his act in expectation he had every right to count upon from the lightning-like character of the attack, he would have reached the Curator's office and been out of the building before quick discovery of the deed made his completion of this attempt impossible. But the girl did cry out, remarked the Assistant District Attorney. How do you account for that, since, as you say, it was not natural for one pierced to the heart without warning? Ah, you see the big mistake we made, Corey and all the rest of us. Had Miss Willetts, or I should say Mademoiselle Duclos, been the one to let out that dolorous cry, the man just behind the partition would have been there almost in time to see her fall. Corey, who started up the stairs at the first sound, would have been at the gallery entrance before the man of the arrow could have dropped the hanging over his retreating figure. But it was not from her lips, poor girl, that this gasping shriek went up, but from those of a woman who saw the deed, knew from whom the arrow came, and for whom it was meant. How do I know this? Because of the time which elapsed, the few precious minutes which allowed Mr. Roberts to get as far away as the court. For she did not voice her agony immediately. Even she, with her own unwounded heart keeping up its functions, stood benumbed before this horror. Not until the full meaning of it had penetrated her reluctant brain did she move or cry out. How long this interval was, whether 3 minutes were consumed by it or 5, we have no means of telling. She, in her despair, would take no note of time, nor would Mr. Travis, reeling in the opposite gallery under the shock of seeing all that he loved taken from him in one awful minute. Here the detective turned with great earnestness toward the two officials. This question of time has been, as I have repeatedly said, the greatest stumbling block we have encountered in our consideration of this crime. How could the assassin, by any means possible, have got so far away from the pedestal in the infinitesimal lapse of time between the cry that was heard and the quick alarm which followed? Now we know. Have you anything to say against this conclusion? Any other explanation to give which will account for every fact as this does?" His answer came in a dubious gesture from the District Attorney and a half-hearted no from his assistant. They were both either too awed by the circumstance or too fearful of mistake to accept without a struggle an accusation of this grave and momentous character against one of Mr. Roberts' stamp and consequence. This was no more than Mr. Gryce had expected, and while he realized that his reputation as a detective of extraordinary insight in cases of an unusually baffling nature trembled in the balance, he experienced a sudden distaste of his work which almost drove him into renouncing the whole affair. But the habits of a lifetime are not parted with so easily, and when the Chief Inspector observed, evidently with the idea of goading him on, "This seems to be mainly a matter of conjecture, Gryce," his old self reasserted itself, and he answered boldly, "I acknowledge that, but conjecture is what in 9 cases out of 10 smooths out many of our difficulties. I have here a short statement made by myself after the most careful inquiries of all that Mrs. Taylor and the untrapped director did and said in the few difficult moments when they met face to face over the body of his unfortunate victim. I ask you to listen to a portion of it." She had not moved. After her one cry of horror, which had brought a rush of witnesses upon the scene, she remained fixed on her knees in the absorbed introspection common to those brought suddenly face to face with a life and death crisis. He, finding that his own safety demanded action suitable to his position as a director, had entered with the crowd, and now stood in her presence, in face of his own diabolical work, in an attitude of cold courage, such as certain strong natures are able to assume under the pressure of great emergencies. So long as she was deaf to all appeal to rouse and explain the situation, he stood back watchful and silent. But when she finally roused and showed a disposition to speak, his desperation drove him into questioning her in order to see how much she understood of the attack which had killed a harmless stranger and let herself go free. He asked her first if she could tell from which direction came the arrow which ended this young girl's life. She made no reply in words, but glanced significantly at the opposite gallery. This called from him the direct inquiry: "Did you see anyone over there at the moment this young girl fell?" She shook her head. Afterwards she explained the denial by saying that she had been looking down into the court. But he did not cease his inquiries. Turning to the people crowding about him, he put the like question to them, but receiving no answer, a silence followed, by which a woman suggested in tones loud enough for all to hear that there were no arrows on the other side of the court, but that the gallery where they stood was full of them. This seemed to alarm Mrs. Taylor. Turning to the director, she asked whether he was sure that the opposite gallery held no arrows and no bows, and when he replied that nothing of the kind was to be found along its entire length, she proceeded to inquire whether any such deed could be committed in a place so open to view without attracting the observation of someone wandering in court or gallery. This undoubtedly to ascertain the full extent of his danger, before bestowing a thought upon herself. But at his answer, given with the cold precision of a thoroughly selfish man, that if anyone in the whole building had seen so much as a movement in a spot so under suspicion, that person would have been heard from by this time, she faltered, and was heard to ask what he had in mind and why the people about her looked at her so. He did not respond directly, but made some remark about the police, which increased her alarm to the point of an attempted justification. She said that it was true about the arrows, as anyone could see by looking up at the walls. But where was the bow? No one could shoot an arrow without a bow. And when someone shouted that if the arrow was used as a dagger, one wouldn't need a bow, a sort of frenzy seized her, and she acted quite insane, falling at the young girl's side and whispering sentence after sentence in her ear. What more was needed to stamp her as a mad woman in the eyes of the ordinary observer? Nothing. But to you and me, with the clue just given, it has another look. She had just seen the man whom she had herself spared from an accusation which would have been his ruin to accept in the coldest fashion an explanation which left her own innocence in doubt. What wonder she succumbed to temporary aberration? As will be remembered, she soon became comparatively calm again, and so remained until in an interview I had with her, a half hour or so later, I urged her, possibly with too much insistence, for some explanation of the extreme agitation she had shown at the time, when she broke forth with the remarkable statement that it was not the child, but her husband, she was mourning, stricken to death, as she would have us believe, simultaneously with the young and innocent victim then lying dead at her feet. Of course, such a coincidence was much too startling not to be regarded by us all as the ravings of delirium, nor has anything occurred since in the way of communication from, or in regard to, the absent one, to show that this so-called warning of death has been followed up by fact. But if you test her action by the theory I have just advanced, viz., that the man she called husband at that moment was in the room with us, and that these words were a plea to him, the last appeal of a broken-hearted woman for the support she felt to be her due, how the atmosphere of unreason and mystery clears itself. His suggestion that what was needed there was an alienist, and the pitiful efforts she made to exonerate herself without implicating him in the murderous event, fall naturally into place, as the action of a guilty man and the self-denying conduct of a devoted woman. Romantic, too romantic, objected the District Attorney. I should think we are listening to one of Dumas's tales. Dumas got his greatest effect from life, or so I have been told, remarked the Chief Inspector. Mr. Gryce sat silent. Suddenly, the District Attorney observed with the slightest tinge of irony edging his tone, I presume you would find the like explanation for the messages she professed to be sending to her husband when engaged in babbling fool words into the dead girl's ears. Certainly. He was there, mark you. He stood where he could both see and hear her. All she said and all she did was by way of appeal to him for some token of regret, some sign that he appreciated her reticence, and when she found that it was bringing her nothing, she fainted away. Ingenuous, very ingenuous, Gryce. Had you failed to give us proofs connecting this idol of the Republican Party with the actual shooting, it would have been simply ingenuous and a quite useless expenditure of talent. But we have these proofs, and while they are mainly circumstantial, they undoubtedly call upon us for some recognition, and so we will hear you out, whatever action we may take afterwards. But first I should like to ask Mr. Gryce one question, interposed his assistant. Then addressing the detective, two mysteries are involved in this matter. You have given us a clever explanation of one of them, but how about the other? Will you, before going further, tell us what connection you find between the theory just advanced and the flight and ultimate suicide of Madame Duclos under the circumstances which point to a desire to suppress evidence even at the cost of her life? It was not from consideration for Mr. Roberts, whom you have shown she hated. What was it, then? Have you an equally ingenious explanation for that, too? I have an explanation, but I cannot say that it is altogether satisfactory. She died but yesterday, and my opportunities have been very small for any work since. What I have learned was from her sister-in-law, whom I saw this morning. Realizing that she will be obliged to give full testimony at the inevitable inquest, she is at last ready to acknowledge that she has been aware for a long time of a secret in the madame's life, that while she knew nothing of its nature, she had always thought that it was in some manner connected with her prolonged residence abroad. Whether it would also explain the meaning of her return at this time and the seemingly inexplicable change made in her daughter's name while en route, must be left to our judgment. Madame had told her nothing. She had simply made use of their home, coming and going, not once but twice, without giving them the least excuse for her inexplicable conduct. 100 questions could not elicit more. But the one who, like myself, has had the opportunity of observing this wretched woman at the moment of her supreme distress, an insight is given into her character which suggests the only plausible explanation of her action. Her sacrifice was one of devotion. She perished in an exaltation of feeling. Love drove her to this desperate act, not the love of woman for a man, but the love which women of her profound nature sometimes feel for one of their own sex. Mrs. Taylor was her friend. Wait, I hope to prove it, and to save her from experiencing the extreme misery of seeing the man who was the joy as well as the bane of her life suffer from the consequences of his own misdeeds. Antoinette Duclos felt willing to die and did. You smile, gentlemen. You think this old man is approaching senility. Perhaps I am. But if the contention is raised that no connection has been shown to exist between Mrs. Taylor and this foreign madame, save such as was made by the death of madame's child, I must retort by asking who warned Madame Duclos of the fatal occurrence at the museum in time for her to flee before even our telephone messages reached her hotel. Gentlemen, there is but one person who could have done this, our chief witness, Ermentrude Taylor. She alone had not only the incentive, but the necessary opportunity. Coroner Price, as well as myself, made a great mistake when we allowed Mrs. Taylor to go home alone that day. Very likely. This from the Chief Inspector. But if the information I have received on this point is correct, she seemed at that time to be so entirely disassociated with a deed whose origin had just been located in the opposite gallery that you have no real cause to blame yourselves in this regard. True, our minds were diverted, but you are waiting for me to explain what I mean by opportunity. Since my attention has been drawn to Mrs. Taylor again, I have been making inquiries. The chauffeur who drove her to her hotel has been found, and he admits that she stopped once on her way home to buy some coffee. He watched her as she went into the store, and he watched her as she came out, and he smelled the coffee. Happily, the interest he took in her as a sick woman entrusted to his care was strong enough for him to remember the store. It was one with 2 entrances, front and back, and next door to it there is a public building with a long row of telephone booths on the ground floor. If I read the incident aright, she bought her coffee, ordered it ground, slipped out at the rear door and into the adjoining building, where, unnoticed and unheard, She called up the Universal and got into communication with Madame Duclos. When she returned, it was by the same route. She did not forget her coffee, nor give way under the great strain to which she had subjected herself till she reached her own apartment. Clever and true, gentlemen, I will stake my reputation on it, unable as I am to explain every circumstance and close up every gap. Have you any further questions to ask, or shall I leave you to your deliberations? End of chapter 28, part 2. A strong man. An hour later, when the Chief Inspector rose to depart, it was with the understanding that until their way cleared and their duty in this matter had become inevitable, no word of this business should reach the press or even pass beyond the three officials interested. Strange to say, they were able to keep this compact, and days elapsed without any public recognition of the new factor which had entered into the consideration of this complicated crime. Then a hint of what was seething in the official mind was allowed to carry its own shock to the person most interested. Mr. Roberts was summoned to an interview with Coroner Price. No reason was given for this act, but the time was set with an exactness which gave importance to a request which they all felt the director would not venture to disregard. Nor did he. He came at the appointed time, and Coroner Price, in welcoming him with becoming deference, could not but notice the great change which had taken place in him since that night when they stood together in the museum and saw the Indian make the trial with bow and arrow which located the point of delivery as that of the upper pedestal. In just what this change lay, the coroner hardly knew, unless it was the increased grayness of his hair. Mr. Roberts' face, handsome as it was not an expressive one. Slight emotions made no impression there, nor did he today present anything but a calm and dignified appearance. Yet he was changed, and anyone who had not seen him since that night must certainly observe it. The coroner, who was also a man of somewhat stolid cut, proffered him a seat and at once opened fire. You will pardon me any inconvenience I may have put you to, Mr. Roberts, when I tell you that Coroner D. of Green County is anxious to have a few words with you. He would have visited you at your home, but I induced him to see you here. Coroner D. of Green County? Mr. Roberts was entirely surprised. And what business can he have with me? It is in regard to the suicide of Madame Antoinette Duclos, committed, as you know, a week since in the Catskills. Ah, an extraordinarily sad affair, and of considerable moment, I should judge, from its seeming connection with the one previously occurring at our museum. The girl's mother, was she not? Grief evidently unseated her brain, but here he changed his position quietly, but with evident effort. In what manner am I supposed to be in a position to help the coroner in his inquiry into this case? I was a witness, together with many others, of what happened after the accident which took place at the museum, but I know nothing of Madame Duclos or of her self-inflicted death beyond what has appeared in the papers. The papers? An uncertain guide, Mr. Roberts. You may not believe it, Coroner Price remarked with a strange sort of smile. But there are secrets known to this office as well as to police headquarters which never get into the most enterprising journals. Was this meant to startle the director, and did it succeed in doing so? It may have startled him, but if so, he made no betrayal of the fact. His manner continued to be perfectly natural, and his voice under full control, as he replied that it would be strange if in a case like this They should give out all the extraneous facts and possible clues which might be gathered in by their detectives. This was carrying the offense into the enemy's camp with a vengeance. But the coroner was saved replying by Mr. Roberts remarking, "But this is not an answer to my question. Why should the coroner of Greene County want to see me?" Coroner Price proffered him a cigar, during the lighting of which the former remarked, "It's certainly very odd. You say that you didn't know Madame Duclos." "No, how should I? She was a foreigner, was she not?" "Yes, a Frenchwoman, both by birth and marriage. Her husband, a professor of languages, was located some 16 years ago in New Orleans." "I never knew him. Indeed, I find it hard to understand why I should be expected to show any interest in him or his wife." "Well, I will tell you. You may not have known the madame, but it is very certain that she knew you." "She?" This certainly unexpected blow seemed to make some impression. "Will you give me your reason for such an assertion? Was the name Duclos a false one? Was her name like that of her daughter Willetts? If so, allow me to assure you that I never heard of a Willetts any more than I have of a Duclos. That a woman of whatever name and nationality should desert her child fills me with horror. I cannot speak of her, dead though she be, with any equanimity. A mother, and acts as she did. She herself was to blame, and only she, for what happened to that beautiful girl. So young, so sweet, so innocent. I have a weakness for youth. To me a girl of that type is sacred. Had I been blessed with such a child. But there, I am straying again from our point. What makes you say Madame Duclos knew me?" Before replying, the coroner rose, and taking a small package from his desk, opened it, and laid out before the astonished eyes of Mr. Roberts the freshly printed photograph of himself with which we are so well acquainted, and then the half demolished one, which for all its imperfections showed that it had been originally struck off from the same negative. "Do you recognize this portrait of yourself as one taken by Fredericks some dozen years ago?" "Certainly. But this other? This end and corner of what must have been my picture, too. Where was it found?" "Ah, that is what I have called you here to learn. This remnant of what you have just admitted to have been your photograph also was found in the very condition in which you see it now in the wastebasket of the room where Madame Duclos lodged previous to her flight to the Catskills." "This with the face?" "Just that, with the face riddled out of it by bullets. She shot 6 times into it at intervals, waiting for the passing of an elevated train by her windows, in hopes that the bigger noise would drown the lesser." "It is nothing," was Mr. Roberts' indignant comment, as he brushed the picture aside. "That was never my picture, or she wanted a target for her skill and didn't care what she took. This is all I have to say to you or to the coroner of Greene County on a matter in which I have no concern. I am sorry to disappoint both of you, but it is so." He rose, and the coroner did not seek to detain him. He merely observed, as the director turned to go, "Have you heard the latest news about Mrs. Taylor?" "No." "She is improving rapidly. She will soon be able to appear before the jury already chosen to inquire into the cause and manner of Miss Willetts' death." "A fine woman," came in a burst from the director's lips as he faced about for a good by nod. "I don't know when I have seen one I admired more." And Coroner Price had nothing to say. He was stupefied. But it was not so with Mr. Gryce, who entered immediately upon Mr. Roberts' departure. "Not a jarring note," he remarked. Evidently he had heard the whole conversation. "I never for a moment imagined that he knew Madame Duclos. Any knowledge we gain of her will have to come from Mrs. Taylor." He's a strong man. We will find it difficult to hold our own against him if we are brought to such an actual struggle. Why did he run the forefinger of his right hand so continuously into his right hand vest pocket? Was Mr. Gryce's sole comment, by which it looks as if he had seen as well as heard. I didn't notice it. Is the district attorney prepared to make the next move? Mine has failed. Not yet. The game is too hazardous. We should only make ourselves ridiculous in the eyes of the whole world if we should fail in an attack upon a man of such national importance. After the 2 inquests and a letter I hope to receive from Switzerland, we may be in a position to launch our first bomb. I don't anticipate the act with any pleasure. The explosion will be something frightful. If half you think is true, the unexpected confronting of him with Mrs. Taylor should produce some result. That's what I reckon on now, if the business falls first to me. I reckon on nothing. Chance is going to take this thing out of our hands. Chance? I don't understand you. I don't understand myself. But this is a case which will never come into court. I differ with you. I almost saw confession in his face when he turned upon me at last with that extravagant expression of admiration for the woman you say he meant to kill. Why did his finger go so continuously to his vest pocket? When you answer that, I will give a name to what I just called chance. End of chapter 29. The Creeping Shadow. Mrs. Taylor suffered a relapse, and the inquest, which had been held back in anticipation of her recovery, was again delayed. This led to a like postponement of an inquiry into the death of Madame Duclos, and a consequent let-up in public interest, which thus found itself, for the nonce, deprived of further food on which to batten. Meanwhile, Mr. Gryce was not idle. Anxious to determine just how and where Madame Duclos' story fitted into the deeper and broader one of the museum crime, he made use of his fast waning strength to probe its mysteries and master such of its details as bore upon the serious investigation to which he was so unhappily committed. When he had done this, when he had penetrated, as it were, into the very heart of the matter, to the elimination of all doubt and the full establishment of his own theory, it was felt that the time had come for some positive action on the part of those interested in the cause of justice. This they decided should take the form of a personal interview between certain officials and Mr. Roberts himself. A lesser man would have been asked to meet the district attorney in his office, but in a case of such moment, where the honor of one so prominent in many ways was involved, it was thought best for them to visit him in his own home. To do this without exciting his apprehension, while still making sure of his presence, required some management. Various plans were discussed, with the result that a political exigency was brought into play. The district attorney asked Mr. Roberts for an interview for the purpose of introducing him to a man whose influence could not fail to play an important part in his future candidacy. He did not name this man, but we will name him. It was the Chief Inspector. The appointment was made and the day set. It was the following Monday. On Tuesday, Coroner Price was to open his inquest. Did Carleton Roberts see any connection between these two events? Who can tell? The secrets of such a brain are not to be read lightly. If we possessed Sweetwater's interest, and were to follow in secret fashion every action of the director on the evening preceding this date, what conclusion should we draw in this regard? How would we characterize his anticipations, or measure in our own mind the possibility of the future as felt by him? He was very quiet. He ate his meal with seeming appetite. Then he took a look over his whole house. From the carefulness with which he noted everything, the changes which he had caused to be made in it were not without their interest for him. Not a young man's interest, but yet an interest as critical and as acute as though he had expected it to be shared by one whose comfort he sought and in whose happiness he would fain take part. This to Sweetwater, had he our vision, would have been incomprehensible from any point of view, especially had he seen what followed when the owner of all this luxury returned to his library. There was a picture there, a small framed photograph which occupied the post of honor on his desk. It showed a young and pretty face, untouched as yet by the cares or troubles of this world. He spent a minute or so in looking at it. Then he slowly lifted it, taking the picture from the frame, gave it another look, during which a smile almost derisive gathered slowly on his lips. Before this smile had altogether vanished, he had torn the picture in two and thrown the fragments into the fire he had kindled early in the evening with his own hands. If he stopped to watch these fragments burn, it was from abstraction rather than from interest, for his step grew lighter as he left the fireplace. Whatever this young girl's face had meant to him in days gone by was now as completely dissipated as the little puff of smoke which had marked the end of her picture. If he read the papers afterward, it was mechanically. Night, and the one great planet sinking in the west, appeared to appeal to him much more strongly than his books or the more than usually stirring news of the day. He must have stood an hour in his unlighted window, gazing out at the tumbling waves lapping the shore. But of his thoughts, God wot, he gave no sign. Later he slept. Slept with his hand under his pillow. Slept, though there were others in the house awake. Or why this creeping shadow of a man outlined upon the wall wherever the moon shone in, and disappearing from sight whenever the way led through darkness. It came from above. No noise accompanied it. Where the great window opened upon the sea, lighting up the main staircase, it halted for several minutes, then passed stealthily down, a shadowy silhouette, descending now quickly, now slowly, as tread after tread is left behind and the great hall is reached. Here there is no darkness. Open doors admit the light from many windows. A semi-obscurity is all, and through this the figure passes, but hesitatingly still, and with pause after pause, till a certain door is reached, a closed door, the only door which is closed in this part of the house. Here it stands with profile to the panels, one ear against the wood. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes pass. Then a hand goes out and touches the knob. It yields without a sound, and a small gap is seen between the door and its casing. This gap grows. Still no sound to disturb the tragic silence. Stop. What was that? A moan? Yes, from within. Another? Yes. Then all is quiet again. The dream has passed. Sleep has resumed its sway. The gap can be safely made wider. This is done, and the figure, halting without, passes in. End of chapter 30. Confronted. Late in the afternoon of the following day, the expected car entered Mr. Roberts' spacious grounds. It contained, beside the chauffeur, just two persons, the district attorney and the chief inspector, but it was followed by another, in which could be seen Mr. Gryce and a stenographer from the district attorney's office. The house was finished by this time, and to one approaching through the driveway presented a very attractive appearance. As the last turn was made, the sea burst upon the view, a somewhat tumultuous sea, for the wind was keen that day and whipped the waves into foam and froth from the horizon to the immediate shore line. To add to the scene, a low black cloud with coppery edges hovered at the meeting of sea and sky, between which and themselves one taut sail could be seen trailing its boom in the water. To one of them, to Mr. Gryce, in fact, upon whose age fancy had begun to work, this battling craft presented an ominous appearance. It was doomed. The gale was too much for it. Did he see in this obvious fact a prophecy of what lay before the man upon whose privacy they were on the point of intruding? The house was so arranged that to reach the main entrance it was necessary to pass a certain window. As they did so, the figure of Mr. Roberts could be seen in the room beyond, moving about in an interested survey of its new furnishings and present comfortable arrangement. To these men bent on an errand as far as possible removed from interests of this kind, the evidence of Mr. Roberts' pleasure in the promise of future domesticity gave a painful shock, and raised in the minds of more than one of them a doubt, perhaps the first in days, whether a man so heavily weighted with a burden of unacknowledged guilt could show this pleasurable absorption in his new surroundings. However, when they came to see him nearer, and marked the stiffening of his body and the slight toss-up of his head, as he noted the number and the exact character of his guests, their spirits fell again, for he was certainly a broken man, however much he might seek to disguise it. Yet there was something in this extraordinary man's personality, a force or a charm, wholly disassociated, it may be, from worth or the sterling qualities which ensure respect, which appealed to them in spite of their new-found prejudice and prevented any dallying with his suspense or the use of any of the common methods usually employed in an encounter of this kind. The chief inspector, to whom the first say had been given, faced the director squarely as he saw how the hand which had just welcomed the district attorney fell at his approach. "You are surprised, Mr. Roberts, and rightly, to see me here not only in connection with the prosecuting attorney of the city of New York, but with a member of my own force. This, you will say, is no political delegation such as you have been led to expect. Nor is it, Mr. Roberts. But let us hope you will pardon this subterfuge when you learn that it was resorted to for the sole purpose of sparing you all unnecessary unpleasantness in an interview which can no longer be avoided or delayed." "Let us sit." It was his only answer. When they had all complied, the district attorney took the lead by saying, "I am disposed to omit all preliminaries, Mr. Roberts. We have but one object in this visit, and that is to clear up to your satisfaction, as well as to our own, certain difficulties of an unexpected nature which have met us in our investigation into the crime in which you, as a director of the museum in which it occurred, and ourselves as protectors of the public peace, are all vitally concerned." "Granted," came in the most courteous manner from their involuntary host. "Yet I fail to understand why so many are needed for a purpose so laudable. Perhaps this will no longer surprise you if you will allow me to draw your attention to this chart," was the answer made to this by the district attorney. He took from a portfolio which he carried a square of paper, which he proceeded to lay out on a table standing conveniently near. Mr. Roberts threw a glance at it and straightened again. "Explain yourself," said he. "I am quite at your service." The district attorney made, perhaps, one of the greatest efforts of his life. "I see that you recognize this chart, Mr. Roberts. You know when it was made and why. But what you may not know is this, that in serving its original purpose, it has proved to be our guide in another of equal if not greater, importance. For instance, it shows us quite plainly who all the persons present at the time of the first alarm were near enough to the Curator's office to be in line of escape from the particularly secluded spot from which the arrow was delivered. Of these persons, only one fulfills all other necessary conditions with an exactness which excuses any special interest we may feel in him. It is he who is tabulated here as number 3. It was said. Mr. Roberts was well acquainted with his own number. He did not have to follow with his eye the point of the District Attorney's finger to know upon whose name it had settled, and for a moment, surprise, shock, the greatest which can befall a man, struggled with countless other emotions in his usually impassive countenance. Then he regained his poise, and with a curiously sarcastic smile such as his lips had seldom shown, he coldly asked, "And by what stretch of probability do you pick me out for this attack? There were other men and women in this court, some very near me, if I remember rightly. In what are their characters superior, or their claims to respect greater, that you should thus single me out as the fool or knave who could not only commit so wild and despicable an act, but go so far in folly, let alone knavery, as to conceal it afterwards? No evidence has been found against the others you have named, which could in any way connect them with this folly, or shall we say knavery, since you yourself have made use of the word. But hard as it is for me to say this, in a presence so highly esteemed, that is not true of you, Mr. Roberts. However high our hopes that you will have such explanations ready as will relieve our minds from further doubts and send us home rejoicing. Shall I be frank in stating the precise reasons which seem to justify our present presumption?" The director bowed, the same curious smile giving an unnatural expression to his mouth. "Let me begin, then," the other continued, "by reading to you a list of questions made out at headquarters as a test by which suspicion might be conscientiously held or summarily dismissed. They are few in number," he added, as he unfolded a slip of paper taken from his vest pocket, "but they are very vital, Mr. Roberts. Here is the first. Whose hand carried the bow from cellar to gallery?" The director remained silent, but the oppression of that silence was difficult for them all to endure. This the second. Was it the same that carried the arrow from one gallery to another? Still no word, but Mr. Gryce, who was watching Mr. Roberts' every move without apparently looking up from the knob of his own cane, turned resolutely aside. The strain was too great. How long could such superhuman composure endure? And which word, of all that were to come, would break it? Meanwhile, the District Attorney was reading the third question. "Is it possible for an arrow shot through the loophole made by the curving in of the vase to reach the mark set for it by Mr. Travis's testimony?" That question was answered when Mr. La Flèche made his experiments from behind the two pedestals. It could not have been done from the one behind which Mr. Travis crouched, but was entirely possible from the rear of the other. With a wave of his hand, Mr. Roberts dismissed this, and the District Attorney proceeded. "Which of the men and women known to be in the museum when this arrow was delivered had enough knowledge of archery to string a bow? A mark can be reached by chance, but only an accustomed hand can string a bow as unyielding as this one." I will pause there, Mr. Roberts. You may judge by our presence here to whose hand and to whose skill we have felt forced to ascribe this wanton shooting of a young and lovely girl. We wish to be undeceived, and stand ready to listen to anything you may have to say in contradiction of these conclusions. That is, if you wish to speak. You know that you will be well within your rights to remain silent. Likewise, if you decide to speak, it will be our painful duty to make a record of your words for any use our duty may hereafter suggest." "I will speak." The words came with difficulty, but they came. "Ask what you will. Satisfy my curiosity as well as your own." "First, then, the bow. It was brought up from the cellar a fortnight or more before it was used, and placed on end in the curator's office, from where it was seen more than once by the woman who wipes up the floors. The person who did this cast a shadow on the cellar wall. That shadow was seen. Need I say more? A man's shadow is himself sometimes. I brought up that bow, but I do not see how that implicates me in the use which was afterward made of it. My reasons for bringing it up were innocent enough." He stopped, not even knowing that he had stopped. His eyes had been drawn to a small article which the District Attorney had dropped from his hand onto the table. It looked like an end of black tape, but whether it was this or something quite different, it held the gaze of the man who was speaking so completely that he forgot to go on. The hush which followed paled the cheeks of more than one man there. To release the tension, the District Attorney resumed his argument, observing quietly, as if no interruption had occurred. "As to the arrow and its means of secret transfer from one side of the building to the other, in the face of a large crowd, let me direct your attention to this little strip of folded silk. You have seen it before. Surely I am quite justified in asking whether indeed you have not handled it both before and after the lamentable occurrence we are discussing." "I see it for the first time," came from lips so stiff that words were with difficulty articulated. "What is its purpose?" he asked after a short pause. "I hardly think it necessary to tell you," came in chilling response from the now thoroughly disenchanted official. "It looks like a loop, and notwithstanding your assertion that you see it now for the first time, we have ample evidence that it was once attached to the coat you wore on that fatal day, and later carefully severed from it and dropped on the museum floor." The District Attorney waited. They all waited, with eyes on the subject of this attack, for some token of shame or indignation at this scarcely veiled insinuation. But beyond a certain stillness of expression, still further masking a countenance naturally cold and irresponsive, no hint was given that any effect had been produced upon him by these words. The coal, before it falls apart into ash, holds itself intact, though its heart of flame has departed. So he, and such was Mr. Gryce's thought as he waited for the District Attorney's next move. It was of a sort which recalls the soul-harrowing legend of the man hung up in an iron cage above a yawning precipice, from under whose madly shifting feet one plank after another is withdrawn from the cage's bottom, till no spot is left for him to stand on, and he falls. "I hear that you are an expert with the bow and arrow, Mr. Roberts, or rather were, at an earlier stage of your career. You have even taken a prize for the same from an Alpine club." Ah, that told. It was such an unexpected blow, and it showed so much knowledge. But the man who thus beheld his own youth brought up an accusation against him quickly recovered, and with an entire change of demeanor faced them all and spoke up at last quickly and defiantly. "Gentlemen, I have shown patience up till now, because I saw that you had something on your minds which it might be better for you and possibly for me to be rid of. This affair of Miss Willetts' death is, as all must acknowledge, baffling enough to strain even to the point of folly any effort made to explain it. I had sympathy with your difficulties, and have still enough of that sympathy left not to express too much indignation at what you are pleased to call your suspicions. I will merely halt for the moment your attempts in my direction by asking, what have you or anybody else ever seen in me to think I would practice my old time skill on a young and beautiful stranger enjoying herself in a place so dear to my heart as the museum of which I have been a director now these many years? Am I a madman or a destroyer of youth? I love the young. This inhuman death of one so fair and innocent has whitened my locks and seared my very heartstrings. I shall never get over it, and whatever evidence you may have or think you have of my having handled bow and arrow in that museum gallery, it must fall before the fact of my natural incapacity to do the thing with which you have charged me. No act possible to man is more in contradiction to my instincts than the wanton or even casual killing of a young girl. I believe you. It was the inspector who spoke, and the emphasis which he gave to his words lifted the director's head again into its old self-reliant poise. But the silence which followed was so weighted with possibilities of something yet to be said by this portentous holder of secrets that it caused the nobly lifted head slowly to droop again, and the lips which had opened impulsively to close. Were the words coming? The words which might at a stroke pull down the whole fabric of his life, past, present, and to come. In his excited state of mind, he seemed already to hear them. Doom was in their sound, and the world, once so bright, was growing dark about him, dark. Yet how could these men know? And if they did, why did they not speak? And they did not, they did not. There was silence in the air, not words, and life for him was taking on once more its ancient colors, when sharp and merry through the heavy quiet there rang out the 5 clear calls of a cuckoo-clock from some nearby room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jolly reminder of old days. But to the men who listened, the voice of doom spoke in its gladsome peal, whether the ears which caught it were those of accuser or accused. Old days were not the days to be rejoiced in at a moment so perilous to one and so painful to the others. With the cessation of the last shrill cry, the inspector repeated the phrase. I believe you, Mr. Roberts. But how about the woman who was troubling you with demands you had no wish to grant? Miss Willetts, as you choose to call her, though you must know that her name is Duclos, was not the only person in the line of the arrow shot on that day from one gallery to the other. Perhaps this weapon of destruction was meant for one it failed to reach. Perhaps, but I have gone far enough. I should not have gone so far if it had not been my wish to avoid any misunderstanding with one of such undoubted claims to consideration as yourself. If you have explanations to offer, if you can any way relieve our minds from the responsibilities which are weighing upon us, pray believe in our honest desire to have you do so. There may be something back of appearances which has escaped our penetration, but it will have to be something startlingly clear, for we know facts in your life which are not open to the world at large. I may even say to your most intimate friends. As, for instance, that Mrs. Taylor is no stranger to you, even if Mademoiselle Duclos was. We have evidence you will find it hard to dispute that you knew and liked each other 15 years or so ago. Evidence? Incontrovertible, Mr. Roberts. Attested to by her? I do not believe it. I never shall believe it, and I deny the charge. The ravings of a sick woman, if it is such you have listened to. I advise you to stop there, Mr. Roberts, interjected the district attorney. Mrs. Taylor had said nothing. Neither has Madame Duclos. What the former may say under oath, I do not know. We shall both have an opportunity to hear tomorrow, when Coroner Price opens his inquest. She is in sufficiently good health now, I believe, to give her testimony. Pray say nothing." Mr. Roberts had started to his feet. "Do nothing. You will be one of the witnesses called." There he stopped, meeting with steady gaze the wild eyes of the man who was staring at him, staring at them all in an effort to hold them back, while his finger crept stealthily and ever more stealthily toward his right hand vest pocket. "You would dare!" he shouted, then suddenly dropped his hand and broke into a low, inarticulate murmur, harrowing and dreadful to hear. To some it sounded like a presage to absolute confession, but presently this murmur took on a distinctiveness, and they heard him say: "I should be glad to have 5 minutes' talk with Mrs. Taylor before that time, in your presence, gentlemen, or in anybody's presence, I do not care whose." Did he know? Had he felt whose steps was in the hall, whose form was at the door? If he did, then the agitation which in another moment shook his self-possession into ashes was that of hope realized, not of fear surprised. Ermentrude Taylor entered the room, and at the sight of her he rose, and his arms went out. Then he sank back weak and stricken into his chair, gazing as if he could never have his fill of her noble countenance, luminous with a boundless pity, if not with the tenderness of unforgotten love. When she was near enough to speak without effort, and had thanked the gentleman who had made way for her with every evidence of respect, she addressed him in quite a natural tone, but with strange depths of feeling in her voice. "What is it you want to say to me? As I stood at the door, I heard you tell these gentlemen that you would like to have a few minutes' talk with me. I was glad to hear that, and I am ready to listen to anything." The pause she made before uttering the last words caused it to ring with double force when it fell. All heads drooped at the sound, and the lines came out on Mr. Gryce's face till he looked his 85 years and more. But what Carleton Roberts had to say at this critical moment of his double life was not at all what they expected to hear. Rising, for her eyes seemed to draw him to his feet, he cried in the indescribable tone of suppressed feeling: "Shadows are falling upon me. My interview with these gentlemen may end in a way I cannot now foresee. In my uncertainty as to how and when we may meet again, I should like to make you such amends as opportunity allows me. Ermentrude, will you marry me now, tonight, before leaving this house?" A low cry escaped her. She was no more prepared for this astounding offer than were these others. "Carleton," came in a groan from her lips. "Carleton, Carleton," the word rising in intensity as thought followed thought, and her spirits ran the full gamut of what this proposal on his part meant in past, present, and future. Then she fell silent, and they saw the great soul of the woman illumine a countenance always noble with the light of a purpose altogether lofty. When she spoke, it was to say: "I recognize your kindness and the impulse which led to this offer, but I do not wish to add so much as a feather's weight to your difficulties. Let matters remain as they are till after." He took a quick step toward her. "Not if my heart is full of regret," he cried. "Not if I recognize in you now the one influence left in this world which can help me bear the burden of my own past and the threatening collapse of my whole future." "No," she replied, with an access of emotion of so elevated a type it added to rather than detracted from her dignity. "It is too much, or it is not enough." His head drooped, and he fell back, throwing a glance to right and left at the two officials who had drawn up on either side of him. It was an expressive glance, and it was as if he said: "You see, she knows as well as you for whom the arrow was intended, yet she is kind." But an instant later he was before her again, with an aspect so changed that they all marveled. "I had hoped," he began, then stopped. Passion had supplanted duty in his disturbed mind, a passion so great it swept everything before it, and he stood bare to the soul before the woman he had wronged, and under the eyes of these men who knew it. "Life is over for us two," said he. "Whether your presence here is a trap in which I have been caught, and from which it is hopeless for me to extricate myself, or whether it is by chance or an act of Providence that we should meet again with eager ears listening and eager eyes watching for such tokens of guilt as will make their own course clear, true it is that they have got what they sought, and whatever the result, nothing of real comfort or honor is left for either you or me. Our lives have gone down in shipwreck, but before we yield utterly to our fate, will you not grant me my prayer if I precede it by an appeal for forgiveness, not only for old wrongs, but for my latest and gravest one? Ermentrude, I entreat." Ah, then, they were witness to the fascination of the man, hidden heretofore, but now visible even to the schooled spectators of this tragedy of human souls. The tone permeated with pathos and charm, the look, the attitude from which all formality had fled and only the natural grace remained, all were of the sort which sways without virtue and rouses in both weak and strong an answering chord of sympathy. The woman, in whom it probably awakened 1,000 memories, trembled under it. She drew back, but her whole countenance had softened, revealing whatever of native charm she also possessed. Would she heed his prayer? If she did not, they could well be silent. If she did... But the woman gave no sign of yielding. "Cease, Carleton," came in stern reply, stern for all the approach to concession in her manner. "If your life and mine are both over, let us talk of other things than marriage. When one faces death, whether of body or spirit, one clings to higher hopes than those of earth or its remaining interests. If my forgiveness will help you to this end, you have it. I have had but one aim in life since we parted, and that was to see your higher self triumph over the material one. If that hour has come or is coming, my life needs no other consolation. In having that, I possess all." The men who listened, stood for a moment in awe of the nobility with which she thus expressed herself. Then the only one person present whom she seemed to see burst forth with a low cry, saying, "You shall not be disappointed. I..." But there she hushed him. "No," said she, and he seemed to understand and was silent. What did this mean? The District Attorney betrayed his doubt, the Chief his, each in a characteristic way. The former frowned, the latter tapped his breast absently with his forefinger while looking askance at Mr. Gryce, who in his turn took up some little object from the desk beside which he was standing, and to it confided whatever surprise he felt at this proof of some uncommunicated secret shared by these two, of which he had not yet become possessed. Then he again looked up, and the glances of the three men met. Should they attempt to sound this new mystery of mutual understanding, to which as yet they had received no clue? No, the inquest would do that. Neither this man nor this woman could stand a close examination. He would weaken from despair, she from the candor of her soul. They would wait. But ah, the tragedy of it! Even these men, hardened by years of contact with every species of human suffering and crime, were openly moved. If they needed an excuse, surely they could find it in the superior abilities and attainments of the man upon whom justice was about to wreak its vengeance. And yet, what more despicable crime had they ever encountered in the long line of their duty? The youth and innocence of the real victim, and the worth of the intended one only added to its wickedness and shame. It was this thought which again steeled their hearts. Meantime, the two upon whom they now redirected their attention had attempted no further speech and made no further move. She had said no to something he was willing to concede, and he had accepted that no as final. Had this brought him any relief? Possibly. And she? Had it had a like effect on her? Hardly. Though her aspect was one of calm resignation, her physical powers were perceptibly failing. This in itself was alarming, and determined them not to subject her any longer to an interview which might rob her of all strength for tomorrow. Accordingly, the district attorney, addressing Mr. Roberts, suggestively remarked: "Mrs. Taylor is showing fatigue. Would it not be better for you to say at once, while she is yet in a condition to remain with us, whether you prefer to make a public statement of your case or leave it to unfold itself in the ordinary manner through the two impending inquests and the busy pen of the reporter? First, am I under arrest? Am I to leave this house? Not tonight. An officer will remain here with you. Tomorrow, after the inquest, perhaps. I will make a statement. I will make it now. I wish to be left in peace tonight, to think and to regret." Then turning to her, "Ermentrude, a woman who has served me and my family for 25 years, is at this very moment in the rear of the house. Go to her and let her care for you. I have business here, business of which I am sure you approve." "Yes, Carleton, and remember that I shall be put upon my oath tomorrow. The questions I am asked I must answer, and truthfully," she added, with a look as full of anguish as inquiry. "I shall be truthful myself," he assured her, and again their eyes met. After a while she gave a stumble backward, which Mr. Gryce, perceiving, held out his arm and assisted her from the room. But once in the hall, he felt the clinch of her fingers digging into his arm. "Is there no hope?" she whispered. "Must I live?" "Yes," he interrupted kindly, but with the authority given him by his relations to this case. "You have won his heart at last, and he speaks truly when he says that to you, and to you alone can he look for comfort, wherever the action of the law may leave him." She shivered, then glowed again with renewed fire. "Thank you," she said, and they passed on. End of chapter 31. Why is that here? They waited while he wrote. A sinister calm, quite unlike that which the victim of his ambition had shown under the stress of equal suffering, if not equal guilt, had subdued his expression to one of unmoved gloom, never to be broken again. Word after word flowed from the point of his pen upon the paper spread out before him. The two officials sitting aside in the shadow watched for the flicker of an eyelash or a trembling of the fingers so busy over their task. But no such sign of weakening did they see. Once only did he pause to look away. Was it into the past or into futurity? With a steady, self-forgetful gaze which seemed to make a man of him again. Then he went on with his task with the grimness of one who takes his last step into ignominy. We will follow his words as he writes, leaving them for others to read on their completion. I, Carleton Roberts, in face of an inquiry which is about to be held on the death of her who called herself Angeline Willetts, but whose real name is, as I have since been told, Angeline Duclos, wish to make this statement in connection with the same. It was at my hand she died. I strung the bow and let fly the arrow which killed this unfortunate child, not with the intention of finding my mark in her innocent bosom, She simply got in the way of the woman for whom it was intended. If I really was governed by intent, of which I here declare before God I am by no means sure. The child was a stranger to me, but the woman in whose stead she inadvertently perished I have known long and well. My wrong to her had been great, but she had kept silence during my whole married life, and in my blind confidence in the exemption this seemed to afford me, I put no curb upon my ambition, which had already carried me far beyond my deserts. Those who read these lines may know how majestic were my hopes, how imminent the honor, to attain which I had employed my best energies for years. Life was bright, the future dazzling. Though I had neither wife nor child, the promise of activity on the lines which appeal to every man of political instinct gave me all I seemed to need in the way of compensation. I was happy, arrogantly so, perhaps, when without warning the woman I had not seen in years, who, if I thought of her at all, I honestly believed to be dead, wrote me a letter recalling her claims and proposing a speedy interview with a view to their immediate settlement. Though couched in courteous terms, the whole letter was instinct with a confidence which staggered me. She meant to re-enter my life, and if I knew her, openly. Nothing short of bearing my name and being introduced to the world as my wife would satisfy her. And this not only threatened a scandal destructive of my hopes, but involved the breaking of a fresh matrimonial engagement into which I had lately entered, with more ardor, I fear, than judgment. What was I to do? Let her have her way, this woman I had not seen in 15 years, who, if at the age of 20, had seemed to my enthusiastic youth little short of a poet's dream, must be far short of any such perfection now. I rebelled at the very thought, yet to deny her meant the possible facing of consequences such as the strongest may well shrink from. And the time for choice was short. She had limited her patience to a fortnight, and one day of that fortnight had already passed. I have in my arrogant manhood sometimes credited myself with the possession of a mind of more or less superiority, but I have never deceived myself as to the meretricious quality of the goodness with which may have thoughtlessly endowed me. I have always known it was not even up to that of men whose standards fall far short of the highest integrity. But never, till that hour came, had I realized to what depths of evil my nature could sink under a disappointment threatening the fulfillment of my ambitious projects. Had there been any prospect of escape from the impending scandal by means usually employed by men in my position, I might have given my thought less rein and been saved at least from crime. But these were not available in my case. She was not a woman who could be bought. She was not even one I could cajole. Death only would rid me of her, kindly death which does not come at call. This is as far as my thoughts went at first. I was a gentleman, and had some of a gentleman's feelings. But when my sleep began to be disturbed by dreams, and this was very soon, I could not hide from myself toward what fatal goal my thoughts were tending. To be freed from her. To be freed from her dinned itself in my ears, sleeping or waking, at home or abroad. But I saw no plain road to this freedom, for our paths never crossed, and my honor as well as safety demanded that the coveted result should be without any possible danger to myself. Cold, heartless villain, you say? Well, so I was. No colder nor more heartless villain lives today than I was between the inception of my purpose and its diabolical fulfillment in the manner publicly known. So true is this that, as time went on, my ideas cleared, and the plan for which I was seeking unfolded itself before me from the day I came upon a discarded bow lying open to view in the museum cellar. The dreams of which I have spoken had prepared me for this sudden knowledge. The woman who blocked my way and against whom I meditated this crime was connected in my mind with Alpine scenery and Alpine events. It was at Lucerne I had first met her, young and fresh, but giving no promise of the woman she has since become. And in the visions which came and went before my eyes, it was not herself I saw, so much as the surroundings of those days, and the feats of prowess by which I had hoped to win her approbation. Among these was the shooting at a small target with a bow and arrow. I became very proficient in this line. I shot as by instinct. I could never tell whether I really took aim or not, but the arrow infallibly hit the mark. In my dreams I always saw it flying, and when this bow came to hand, a thought of what the two might accomplish came with it. Yet even then I had no real idea of putting into practice this fancy of a distempered brain. I brought up the bow from the cellar and hid it unstrung in the Curator's closet, more from idle impulse, I fondly thought, than from any definite purpose. Another day I saw the Curator's keys lying on his desk, and took them to open a passage to the upper floor. But for all that I felt sure that I would never use the bow, even after I had thrust it near to hand behind the tapestry masking the secret entrance to this passage. One dreams of such things, but they do not perpetrate them. I might approach the deed, I might even make every preparation for its accomplishment, but that did not mean that the day would ever come when I should actually loose an arrow from this bow against a human breast. More than once I laughed at the mere idea. But the devil knew me better than I knew myself. Impelled by these same instincts, I answered the letter sent me with the assurance that I would surely see her. But I did not name any day, intuitively knowing that what I dreamed of doing but certainly should not do required a set of circumstances not easily to be met with. Instead, I bade her show herself in the second section of the southern gallery every Tuesday and Friday at the exact hour of noon. If at the moment the two hands of the clock came together, she saw me on the lower step of the main staircase, she was to know that I was free to talk and would soon join her. If she did not see me there, she was to return home and come another day. She answered that she would come but once, and set the day. This was startling to my pride, but in a way it brought me a sense of relief. To wait till all was propitious might mean continual delays. The very fact of my uncertainty as to whether or not I should have the courage of my wishes at the critical moment made an indefinite prolongation of my present condition undesirable. Better one straight risk and be done with it. I was to wait 2 weeks. Why she exacted so long and seemingly unnecessary a delay, I do not know. Before I saw her, I thought it was from a sheer desire to make me suffer. Now I know it was not for that. However, it did make me suffer, from the alternate weakening and strengthening of my resolve. When the day came, the most trivial of circumstances would have deterred me from what still had been the nature of a dream to me. Unhappily, everything worked for its fulfillment. There had never been fewer persons in the building at the noon hour, nor had there been a time during the past 2 weeks when the Curator was more completely occupied in a spot quite remote from his office. As I tried the door leading up the little winding staircase to the one back of the tapestry where the bow lay, and found it, just as I had left it, unlocked, I had a sense for the first time that the courage concerning which I had so many doubts would hold. At that moment I was a murderer in heart and purpose, whatever I was after or have been since. As I recognized this fact, I felt my face go pale and my limbs shake from sheer horror of myself. But this weakness was short-lived, and I felt my blood flowing evenly again when, having slipped into my place behind the upper pedestal, I peered through my peephole in a search for her figure in the spot where I had bidden her await me. She was not there, but then it was not quite 12, though the noon hour was so near. She must be somewhere in the gallery and liable at any minute to cross my line of vision. It was 15 years, as I have already said, since I had seen her, and I had no other picture of her in my mind than the appearance she had made as a girl, coarsened by time and disappointment. Why should I have looked for just this sort of change in her, God knows. But I did expect it, and probably would not have recognized her if I had passed her in the court. But I was not worrying about any mistake I might make of this kind. All I seemed to fear was that at the critical moment someone else would pass between us on my side of the gallery. I never thought of anyone passing in front of her. I had picked out Section 2 as the place where she was to show herself, because it was in a direct line with the course an arrow would take from a sight behind the vase. I had bade her to look for me in the court, and that would bring her forward to the balustrade in front. A knot of scarlet ribbon at her breast was to distinguish her. But the spot I had thus chosen for her, and the spot I had chosen for myself, had this disadvantage, that while I could see straight to my mark from the peephole I have mentioned, I could see nothing to the right or left of that one line of vision. Why I did not realize the hazard involved in this fact, I do not know. Enough of my whole thought was centered on the lookout I was keeping, and it was with a shock of surprise I suddenly saw the whole scene blotted from my view by the passing of someone on my own side of the gallery. This must have been the Englishman who found his vantage point from behind the other pedestal. He went by quickly, and as the opening cleared once more, I beheld the woman for whom I was waiting appear in the spot selected. For an instant I was dazzled. I had not expected to see so noble a figure, and in that instant a cloud came before my eyes. My resolution failed. I was almost saved. She was almost saved, when instinct got the better of my judgment, and the arrow flew, just as that young creature bounded forward in her delight at seeing her steamer admirer watching her from my side of the court. The shock of thus beholding a perfect stranger fall under my hand benumbed me, but only for an instant. In the 2 weeks of intolerable waiting through which I had just passed, I had so forcibly impressed upon my consciousness the exact course I was to pursue from the instant the arrow left the bow, that I went about the same automatically. Pulling out the edge of the tapestry, I slipped behind it, dropping my bow in the doorway left open for my passage. This caused me no thought and awakened no fears. But what took all the nerve I possessed, and gave me in one awful moment a foretaste of the terror and despair awaiting me in the days to come, was the opening of the second door, the one leading into the Curator's office. What might I not be forced to encounter when the knob to this was turned? Some strolling guest, Corey the attendant, or even the guard who was never where he was needed and always where he was not. For anyone to be there of sufficient intelligence to note my face and the place from which I came meant the end of all things to me. It was not necessary for this imaginary person to be in the room. To be within sight of it was enough. But this fear, this horror of impending retribution, did not make me hesitate or delay my advance a single instant. Everything depended upon my being one of the crowd when the first alarm was raised. For with the daring of one who, in escaping a present danger, hurls himself knowingly into another equally perilous, I pushed open the door and entered the office. It was empty. Fortune had favored me thus far, nor was there anyone in the court beyond, near enough or interested enough to note my presence or observe any effort I might make at immediate departure. With the hope riding high within my breast that I should yet reach the street before my crime was discovered, I made for the nearest exit. But I was not destined to reach it. When I was only some half dozen paces from the great door, Corey's cry rang loudly through the building, with the result that all egress was shut off, and I was left with no other aid than my own assurance to face my hideous deed with all its appalling consequences. How it served me you have seen. Steeled by a sense of my own danger, I was able to confront the woman whom I had so deeply wronged, whom I had endeavored to kill, and ply her with those questions upon whose answer depended not only my honor, but my very life. My cold-blooded absorption in my own security and her almost superhuman devotedness must have given the powers cognizant of mortal lives a new lesson in human nature. Never has a greater contrast been shown between self-seeking man and self-forgetful woman. But deeply as I was impressed by the steadfastness and magnanimity of her spirit, nay, by the woman herself, I have been less oppressed by the great debt I owed her than by the thought, growing more intolerable every day, that in my frenzied struggle against fate I had cut short the existence of a young and lovely girl whose right to live was by all comparisons superior to my own. But now, as the shadows fall thickly about me, and the last page of my dishonorable existence awaits to be turned, my mortal wound is this: that I must leave to loneliness and unspeakable grief the great-souled woman who has seen into the heart of my crime and yet has forgiven me. All else of anguish or dread is swallowed up in this one overmastering sorrow. To her my heart's thanks are here given. To her my last word is due. May she find it in all that her soul calls for in this hour of supreme disaster: repentance equal to my sin, and a recognition of her worth which, late as it is for her comfort, may lead to her acceptance of the consolation yet to be meted out to her from eternal sources. That was all. The pen dropped from his hand, and he sat inert, almost pulseless, in the desolation of a despair known only to those who, at a blow, have sunk from the height of public applause into the depths of irretrievable ignominy. The district attorney, who was a man of more feeling than was usually supposed, contemplated him in compassionate silence for a moment, then gently, very gently for him, leaned forward and drew from under the unresisting hands the scattered sheets which lay in disorder before him, and passed them on to his stenographer. "Read," said he, but immediately changed his mind and took them back. "I will read them myself, Mr. Roberts. I must ask you to listen. It is right for you to know exactly what you have written before you affix your signature to it." Mr. Roberts bowed mechanically, but he looked very weary. The district attorney began to read. It is a matter of doubt whether Mr. Roberts so much as heard him. Yet the reading went on, and when the last word was reached, the district attorney, after a pause during which his eye had consulted that of the Chief Inspector, remarked in a kindly tone and yet with an emphasis impossible to disregard: "I see that you have made no mention of Madame Duclos in this relation of the cause and manner of her young daughter's death. Is it possible that you are ignorant of the part she played in your affairs, or the reasons she had for the suicide with which she terminated her life?" "I know nothing of the woman, but that she was the mother of the girl who," he hesitated, then added with a gesture of despair, "fell under my hand." The district attorney said nothing in reply. He simply waited, but no denial or further admission came. "She was a friend of Mrs. Taylor," suggested the Chief Inspector, as the silence grew somewhat oppressive. "An old friend, a friend of her early days. Do you not remember?" I do not." His tormentors went no further. Why harass him for an item of knowledge which the morrow would certainly bring to light? Instead, they hurried through the remaining formalities, adding to the reading already made a capitulation of such answers as he had given to their questions, and witnessing while he signed both papers. This done, he was left for a moment in peace, while the two officials drew aside into the embrasure of the window for a momentary conference. He seemed to notice the hush, for he roused from the torpor in which he was again about to sink and glanced cautiously about him. The stenographer was busy with his papers, and the other two stood with their backs to him. If help was to come, it must come now. This he realized with a sudden graying of his face which took from it the last vestige of that youthfulness which had been its distinguishing features, and the finger which he had fumbled from time to time in his vest pocket stole thither once more, bringing forth a little vial which in another moment he raised to his lips. Was there no one to see, no one to stop him? No, the stenographer was closing up his bag, and the two officials deep in conversation. He could drain the last drop unseen. But the sound of the little vial crashing upon the hearthstone, whither he had flung it, broke the quiet and startled the District Attorney forward in a doubt bordering upon terror. "What is that?" he asked, pointing to the fragments that had just missed the ash heap. "It contained oblivion," was the answer, given him in steady tones. "Do you wonder that I sought it? Nothing can save me. I have 2 minutes before me. I would dedicate them to her." His head fell forward on his hands. The clock on the mantel struck. Could it be that when the second hand circled its small disk twice? This was the thought of the District Attorney, but not of the Chief Inspector. He had advanced to the desk where Mr. Roberts was still sitting, and remarked with a gravity exceeding any he had hitherto shown: "Mr. Roberts, I have a great disappointment for you. This little vial of yours, which held poison yesterday, contained nothing but a few drops of harmless liquid to-day. The change was made in the night by one suspicious of your intention. You will have to face the full consequences of your crime." Carleton Roberts' arms collapsed, and his face fell forward upon them, and they heard a groan. Then in the short silence which followed, another and a very different sound broke upon their ears. 7 clear calls from the Cuckoo-Clock rang out from the room beyond, followed by a woman's smothered cry. It was the one ironic touch the situation had lacked. It pierced the heart of Carleton Roberts and started him in anguish to his feet. "O God," he cried, "that I should have let that thing of evil shriek out the wicked hours from day to day, only to torment her now with old remembrances! Why did I not crush it to atoms long ago? Why did I leave it hanging on my wall?" With a dash he was into the hall. In another instant he was at the door of his bedroom, followed by the two officials crowding closely up behind him. Would they find her there? Yes. Where else should she be? She whom this call from the past might almost draw from the grave. She was there, but not in the spot where they had expected to see her, nor in that state of collapse of which her former weakness had given promise. Apart from Mr. Gryce, with her form drawn up to its full height, she stood, with her finger pointing not at the Cuckoo-Clock, as would seem most natural, but at a small newspaper print of the dead girl's face pinned upon another wall. "Why is that here?" she cried in passionate inquiry, which ignored every other presence than that of him who must heed and answer her. "Carleton, Carleton, why have you pinned that young girl's face opposite your bed, where you can see it on waking, where it can look at you and you at it? Oh!" Here, checked by a sudden thought, she broke off, and her tone changed to one of doubt. "Perhaps you didn't put it there yourself. Perhaps its presence on your wall is a trick of the police to startle you into betrayal. Was it? Was it?" "No, Ermentrude." The words came slowly but firmly. "I put it there myself. I thought it would haunt me less than if left to my imagination." Then, in a low tone, which perhaps reached no other ears than hers, "I do not know what it does to me, or what I see in it. Something besides youth and beauty. Something—" "Hush!" She had him by the arm. "Forget it. These men are listening." But with a convulsive movement he broke from her hold, and in doing so his eyes fell on a mirror confronting him from the opposite side of the room. Two faces were visible in it, his own and that of his young victim pictured in the print hanging on the wall behind him. They seemed alive. Both of them seemed alive. And as he saw them thus in conjunction, the sweet, pure countenance of the child he had instinctively mourned, peering at him over his guilty shoulder, the sweat started on his forehead, and he uttered a great cry. Then he stood still, swaying from side to side, the eyes starting from his head in a horror transcending all that had gone before. "Take him away!" she cried. "Out of the room! Let him remain anywhere but here! I pray you! I entreat!" But he was not to be moved. "Ermentrude," he whispered. "They say her last name was Duclos. She gave her name as Willetts. What was her name? You know the truth, and can tell me." End of chapter 32. Again the cuckoo clock. Then, to the wonder and admiration of all, this extraordinary woman showed her full strength and the inexhaustible power she possessed over her own emotions. With a smile piteous in its triumph over a suffering the depths of which they were just beginning to sound, she held his gaze in hers and quietly said: "You have driven me to the wall, Carleton. If I answer, nothing remains to us of hope or honor, nothing upon which to stay our souls but a consciousness of truth. Shall we let all go and meet our fate as people should, who stand on a desolate shore and see the whole world roll away before them?" What was her name? At his look, at this repetition of his question, she straightened up and addressed herself to Mr. Gryce. "You were astonished and regarded me curiously when at the sound of that foolish little clock I entered this room. That little clock means everything to me, gentlemen." Here she surveyed them one after the other with her proud and candid eye. "It is the one witness I have, is it not, Carleton?" she asked, turning quickly upon him. "You have not failed me in this?" He shook his head. "A witness to what I am still ready to ignore, if such is your will, Carleton." Terror, terror, far beyond anything they had seen him in yet, paled his cheek and made his face almost unrecognizable. But he could still speak, and in the murmur he let fall she heard not a word of protest. "May I ask one of you to take down that clock?" In a few minutes it lay on the table to which she had pointed. Mr. Gryce, who had at that moment in his pocket a copy of the inscription pasted on its back, expected her to turn it over and show them the token of Mr. Roberts and her united initials. But it was not this she had in mind. Though she took up the clock, she did not turn it round, only looked at it steadily, her trembling lips and a tear, the first they had seen, testifying to the rush of old memories which this simple little object brought back to her long-suffering heart. Then she laid it down again and seemed to hesitate. "I want to get at the works inside," she appealed to them with a helpless accent. "Can you tear off the back? That would be the quickest way." But no, I know a quicker." And lifting the clock again, she turned it upside down and shook it. They heard. What did they hear? No one could say, but when she again reversed it, there fell out upon the table and rolled to the floor a small gold circlet. Lifting it, Mr. Gryce held it out to her. Taking it, she carried it over to the district attorney and placed it in his hand. "Read the inscription inside." He did so, and looking up quickly, said, "This is a wedding ring, yours. You believe yourself to have been married to him?" "I was married to him in Switzerland. The marriage was legal. He knows it. He acknowledges it. Or why should he keep this ring? I have endured seeing him put another woman in my place. I have kept silence for years. But when he asks the right name of the child shot down in the museum, and asks it in a way which compels answer, then I must make known my rightful claims. For that child was not only mine, but his, born after he left me and reared without his knowledge, first in this country and then in France." And breaking down now utterly, she fell to her knees, sobbing out her soul at the feet of him from whose honor she had torn the last poor, pitiful shred. As for him, he said nothing. Even his lips refused the smallest cry. Only his hand, which had hung at his side, went to his heart, and thus he stood swaying, swaying, till he finally fell forward into the arms she suddenly threw out to receive him. "Carleton, Carleton," she wailed, searching for consciousness in his fast glazing eyes. "It was to show you your child that I made the appointment at the museum. Not for myself, oh, not for myself, but for your sake, that you might have—" Useless, all useless. He was dead. Would she have had it otherwise? Would any of them? When they were quite sure of the fact, she placed the ring in his still warm hand, and then she solemnly put it on her finger, and turning, faced them all. "Don't blame me too much for this final blow I gave him. He had already seen the truth in that mirror over there. His face, look at it, and then at this picture of her taken after death, and see the resemblance. It is showing plainer every minute. It was something which had worried and eluded him. Nothing could have kept back the truth from him after that one glimpse he caught of himself and her in the mirror. I loved him. Mine is the grief. You will let me stay here with him tonight. Tomorrow I will answer all questions." End of chapter 33. The Bud, Then the Deadly Flower, Part 1. You who have read thus far will care little for the legalities which followed the events just related, but you may wish to know to a fuller extent some of the facts in Ermentrude Taylor's life which led to this tragic end of all her hopes. Her story is twofold, the portion connecting her with Carleton Roberts being entirely disassociated from that which made her the debtor of Antoinette Duclos. Let me tell the latter first, as it precedes the other, and tell it in episodes. Two girls stood at one end of a long walk of immemorial yews. At the other could be seen the advancing figure of a man, young, alert, English-clad, but unmistakably foreign. They were schoolgirls and bosom friends, he their instructor in French. The walk one attached to a well-known seminary. When they had entered this walk it had been empty. Now it held for one of them, and possibly for the other too, a world of joy and promise, the world of 17, innocent and unthinking. Neither of them had known her own heart, much less that of her fellow. But when in the face of that approach, eye met eye, with an askance look of eager question, revelation came, crimsoning the cheeks of both, and marking an epoch in either life. Noble of heart and tender toward each other, they were yet human. Arm fell from arm, and, With an equally spontaneous movement, they turned to search each the other's countenance, not for betrayal, for that had already been made, but for those physical charms or marks of mental superiority which might attract the eye or win the heart of a man of the ideality of this one. Alas, these gifts, for gifts they are, were much too unequally distributed between these two to render the balance at all even. Ermentrude was handsome, Antoinette was not. Ermentrude had besides, what even without beauty would have made her conspicuous to the eye, the figure of a goddess and the air of a queen. But Antoinette was small and had to feel secure and in a happy mood to show the excellence of her mind and the airy quality of her wit. Then Ermentrude had money and could dress, while Antoinette, who was dependent upon an English uncle for everything she possessed, wore clothes so plain that but for their exquisite neatness one would never dream that she came from French ancestry, and that ancestry noble. Yes, she had that advantage. Rank was hers, but not the graces which should accompany it. More than that, she had nothing with which to support it. Better be of the yeoman class like Ermentrude, and smile like a duchess granting favors, or so she thought, poor girl, as her meek regard passed from the friend whose affections she had thus acknowledged to the man whose approbation would make a goddess of her too. He was coming, not with his usual indifferent swing, but eagerly, joyously, as though this moment meant something to him too. She knew it did. Small memories rushing upon her made no doubt of that. But why? Because of Ermentrude or because of herself? Alas, she could recall nothing which would answer that. They were much together. He had scarcely ever seen them separate. It might be either. Hardly alive from suspense, she watched him coming, coming. In a moment he would be upon them. On which would his eyes linger? That would tell the tale. In an anguish of ungovernable shyness, she slipped behind the ample figure of her friend till only her fluttering skirt betrayed her presence. Perhaps she was saved something by this move, perhaps not. She did not see the beam of joy sparkling in his eye as he greeted Ermentrude, but she could not but mark the heaviness of his step as he passed them by and wandered away into the shadows. And that she understood. Ermentrude had not smiled upon him. To him the moment had brought pain. It was enough. Now she knew. But why had not Ermentrude smiled? A dormitory lighted only by the moon. Two beds close together, in one a form of noble proportions, and in the other the meager figure of a girl almost buried from sight among pillows and huddled up blankets. Both are quiet save for an occasional shudder which shakes the bed of the latter. Ermentrude lies like the dead, though the moonlight falls upon her face, blanching it to the aspect of marble. Even her lashes rest moveless on her cheek. But she is not sleeping. She is listening, listening to the sobs, almost inaudible, which now and then escape from the beloved one at her side. As they grow fainter and fainter, and gradually die away altogether, till stillness reigns through the whole dormitory, she rouses, and bending forward on her elbow, looks long and lovingly at the wet brow of her sleeping mate. She then sinks back again into rigidity, with a low moan, ending in the whispered words, "He does not love, not yet. A slight thing will turn him. Did I not see him glance back twice, and both times at her? The look with which she greeted him was so wonderful." A village street in Brittany, a parish church in the distance, two women bidding each other farewell, amid a group of wedding guests, gay as the heavens are blue. Au revoir was the whisper breathed by the bride into the ear of the other. Au revoir, my Ermentrude. May you have a happy year in Switzerland. Au revoir, little madame. You will be happy, I know, in those United States to which you are going." And the tears stood in the eyes of both. "You will write?" "I will write." But the bride did not seem quite satisfied. Glancing about and finding her young husband busy with his adieu, she drew her friend apart and softly murmured: "There's something I must say, something I must know before the sea divides us. You remember that day we all left school, and you went home and I came to Brittany? Ermentrude, Achille tells me that on that day he sought the whole house over for you till he came upon you in one of the classrooms, and that you, whom I had sometimes seen so sad, were very gay, and told him between laughing and crying that you were bidding a solemn farewell to all the nooks and corners of the old seminary, because your fiancé awaited you at home, and there would be no coming back." "I meant my music." "He did not know that, Ermentrude." And here she laid her hands upon the other's shoulders, drawing back as she did so to look earnestly up into her face. "Was that done for me?" They were too near for anything but the truth to pass from eye to eye. Ermentrude tried to laugh, and uttered a quick "No, no." But the little bride was not deceived. Again upon her face there appeared that wonderful look of hers, which made her face for the moment verily beautiful, and unclasping her hands, she threw them about the other's neck, whispering in awed tones: "You loved him too." Then, after a moment of silence dear to both their hearts, she drew back to give her friend one other look, and quietly said: "His heart is mine now, Ermentrude, wholly and truly mine, and so you would have it be, I am sure. Life looks fair to me, and very sweet. But however fair, however sweet, that life is yours if ever you want it, and when you want it. The time may come, one never knows, when I can pay you back this debt. Till then, let there be perfect trust and perfect love between us. Give me your hand upon it, not just your lips, for I speak as men speak when they mean to keep their word." Their eyes met, their hands clasped, and then the bridegroom drew away his bride, and Ermentrude turned with bowed head and glistening eyes to enter upon the new life awaiting her in ways she had yet to tread. The second series of episodes opens with the meeting of a man and a woman on a rustic bridge spanning a Swiss chasm. They are strangers to each other, yet both instinctively pause, and a flush of intuitive feeling dyes the cheeks of each. The eternal, ever recurring miracle has happened. He sees woman for the first time, though he thought himself in love before, and had wandered thus far in an effort to forget. So likewise with her. She had had her fancies, or rather her one fancy, but when in strolling along this road ahead of her party, she saw rising between her and the glorious landscape which had hitherto filled her eye the fine masculine head and perfect figure of Carleton Roberts. This fancy floated from her mind like the veriest thistledown, leaving it free to expand in fuller hopes and deeper joys than visit many women, even when they think they love. Alas! Why in that instant of mutual revelation had not the further grace been given them of quick catastrophe, shutting the door upon a future of which neither could then dream or sense the coming doom? It was not to be. He passed, she passed, and for a time the look they gave each other was all. But the world had been glorified for them both, and destiny waited. Good looks, yes, but nothing else. Very ordinary connections, very. A little money, true. Her uncle, whom by the way I judge you have not seen, will leave her a few thousands, but meanwhile he is a fixture, will not leave her or let her leave him, which is a misfortune, since in a social way he is simply impossible. No sort of match for you, Roberts, Cut and run while there is time. That's my advice to you, given in the most friendly spirit." "Thank you. As I have just but met Miss Taylor, don't you think such advice is a little premature?" "No, I don't. She is a woman who must be loved or left, that's all. You've heard me." Did Carleton Roberts heed these words? No. What man in the thrall of his first romance ever did? "You love me, Ermentrude?" "I love you, Carleton." "For a day, for a month, or for a year?" he smiled. "Forever," she answered. "That's a long time," he murmured, with his eyes on a little clock hanging in the shop window before which they had stopped in one of their infrequent walks together. "A long time. That foolish little clock will beat out the hours of its short life and go the way of all things before we shall hardly have entered upon the souls forever." "That clock will last our lifetime, Carleton. Afterward, love will not be counted by hours." As she said this, she turned her face his way, and he saw it in its full flower with the light of heaven upon it. In later years he may have forgotten the emotion of that moment, but they were the purest, the freest from earthly stain that he was ever destined to know. "I will love you forever," he whispered. "That little clock shall be my witness." And he drew her into the shop. "Cuckoo!" Ermentrude glanced up. The clock hung on her wall. "Oh," she murmured, "each hour it will speak to me of him and his words." Then softly, like one adream in paradise, "I love but thee, and thee will I love to eternity." Such was the event to her. What was it to him? Let's see. A hotel room, a view of Pilatus, but with its top lost in enveloping clouds. Seated before it with a pen in hand and above a sheet of paper, Carleton Roberts eyes these clouds but does not see them. He is hunting in his brain for words and they do not come. Why? His mother's name is on the page, and he has only to write that she has been quite correct in her judgment as to the unfitness of the marriage he had had in mind. That youth should mate with youth, that if she could see the glorious young girl whose acquaintance he had made here, she would be satisfied with his new choice which promised him the fullest happiness. Why then a sheet yet blank, and a hesitating hand, when all it had to do was to write? Who can tell? Man knows little of himself or of the conflicting passions which sway him this way or that, even when to the outward eye, and possibly to the inner one as well, action looks easy. Did he feel, without its reaching the point of knowledge, that this mother of keenest expectation and highest hope would not be satisfied with what this charming but undeveloped girl of middle-class parentage would bring him? Or was there deep down in his own undeveloped nature a secret nerve, alive to ambitions yet unnamed, to hopes not yet formulated, which warned him to think well before he spoke the irrevocable words linking a chain which, though twined with roses, was nevertheless a chain which nothing on earth should have the power to break? He never sounded his soul for an answer to this question, but when he rose the paper was still blank. A letter had not been written. "I do not like secrecy. Only for a little while, Ermentrude. My mother is difficult. I would prepare her." "And uncle?" "What of uncle?" "He made me take an oath today." "An oath?" "That I would not leave him while he lived." "And you could do that?" "I could do nothing else. He's a sick man, Carleton. The doctors shake their heads when they leave him. He will not live a year." "A year? But that's an eternity. Can you wait? Can I wait a year?" "He loves me, and I owe everything to him. Next week we go to Nice. These are days of parting for you and me, Carleton." Parting? What word more cruel? She saw that it shook him, and held her breath for his promise that she should not be long alone. But it did not come. He was taking time to think. She hardly understood his doing this. Surely his mother must be very difficult, and he a most considerate son. She knew he loved her, perhaps never with a more controlling passion than at this moment of palpitating silence. As she smiled, he caught her to his breast. "We have a week yet," he cried, and left her hurriedly, precipitately. It was their last ride, and they had gone far, too far, Ermentrude thought, for a day so chilly and a sky so threatening. They had entered gorges, they had skirted mountain streams, had passed a village, left a ruined tower behind, and were still facing eastward, as if Lucerne had no further claims upon them, and the world was all their own. As the snows on the higher peaks burst upon their view, she made an attempt to stop this seeming flight. "My uncle," she said, "he will be counting the hours. Let us go back." Then Carleton Roberts spoke. "Another mile," he whispered, not because he feared being overheard by the driver, but because love's note is instinctively low. "You are cold. We shall find there a fire and dinner, and listen, Ermentrude, a minister ready to unite us. We are going back, man and wife." Carleton. "Yes, dear, it is quite understood. Letters are urging my return to New York. Your uncle is holding you here. I cannot face an uncertain separation. I must feel that you are mine beyond all pre-adventure, must be able to think of you as my wife, and that will hold us both and make it proper for you to come to me, if I cannot come to you, the moment you are free to go where you will." "But why this long ride, this far away spot? Why couldn't a minister be found in Lucerne? Is our marriage to be as secret as our engagement? Is that what you wish, Carleton?" "Yes, dear, for a little while, just a little while, till I have seen my mother, and rid our way of every obstacle to complete happiness." "It will be better. When one has promised to love forever, what are a few weeks or months? Make me happy, dear. You have it in your power to do so. Happy. When once I can whisper wife, the world will not hold a happier man than I." Did she yield because of her own great longing? No, it was by that phrase he caught her. The world will not hold a happier man than I. Mountains, icy peaks, with sides heavy with snow, and so near. Almost they seemed to meet across the narrow valley. She gave them one quick glance. Then her eyes and her heart became absorbed in what she could see of this Alpine village, holding up its head in the eternal snows like an edelweiss on the edge of a glacier. It was to be the scene of her one great act in life, the spot she was entering as a maiden and would leave as a wife. What other spot would ever be so interesting? To notice every detail of house and church would not take long. It was such a small village, and the streets were so few, and the people, why, she could count them. Afterward, she found that the exact number and the difference in color of the short line of timbered houses stretching between them and the church were imprinted on her brain. But she did not know it at the time, for her attention was mainly fixed upon the people when once she had seen them. For there was a strangeness in their looks and actions she did not understand, all the more that it seemed to have nothing to do with either Carleton or herself. It was not fear they showed, not exactly, though consternation was not lacking in their aspect, so strangely similar in all, whether they were men or women, or whether they stood in groups in the street or came out singly on the doorstep to glance about and listen, though there seemed to be nothing to listen to, for the air was preternaturally still. "Carleton, Carleton," she asked, as he came to lift her to the ground, "see those people, how oddly they act. The whole town is in the street. What is the matter?" "Nothing, except that if we do not hasten, We shall have to return unmarried. The minister is waiting for us." "What, in the church?" "Yes, dear. We are a little late." She took his arm, and though they were a fine couple, and the event was an almost unprecedented one in that remote village, only a few followed them. The rest hung around their homes or gazed with indecision at the mountains or up and down along the empty roads. "Wilt thou have this woman?" The ceremony had proceeded thus far, and all seemed well, when, with a rush and a cry, a dozen people burst into the building. "The snows are moving," rang up the aisles in accents of mad terror. "Save yourselves." Then came the silence of emptiness. Every soul had left the church, save the three people before the pulpit. An avalanche, and the ceremony was yet incomplete. Ermentrude never forgot Carleton Roberts' look. Doubtless he never forgot hers. Meanwhile, the minister spoke. "There is a chance for escape. Take it. The good God will pardon you." But the bridegroom stood firm, and the bride shook her head. "Not till the words are said which make us man and wife," declared Carleton Roberts. "Unless," and here his perfect courtesy manifested itself even in this crisis of life and death, "you feel it is your duty to carry what assistance you can to the saving of your frightened flock." "God must save my flock," said the minister, with a solemn glance upward. "I am where my duty places me." And calmly, as though the pews were filled with guests, and joy attended the ceremony instead of apprehended doom, he proceeded with the rite. "Wilt thou have this man?" The glad "I will" leaped bravely from Ermentrude's lips, but it was lost in loud calls and shrieks from without. Mingled with that sound, terrible to all who hear, impossible to describe, of the might of the hills made audible in this down-rushing mass, now halting, now gathering fresh momentum, but coming, always coming, till its voice, but now a threat, swells into thunder in which all human cries are lost. And only from the movement of the minister's lips can this couple see that the words which make them one are being spoken. Then comes the benediction, and with the falling of those holy hands, a headlong rush into the open air. A vision of flying forms here, there, and everywhere. Men staggering under foolish burdens, women on their knees, with arms lifted to heaven or flung around their babes, hope lost under the bowing mountain. And in the midst of it all, plain to the view of all, the stranger's horse and carriage, which, standing there, stamped with undying honor these terrified villagers, who had seen and not touched them, though death had them by the hair. "Quick, quick, you mother there with the child, get in, get in. There is room here for one more." But another got the place. The driver, reeling as he ran, sprang for the empty seat and hung there between the wheels as the horse plunged and tore away to safety, just as the great mass with its weight of gathered boulders and uprooted forests crashed into the final doom upon that devoted village, burying it from sight as though it had never been. To safety, yes, for two of them. The other, struck by a flying stone, fell in the road and was covered in a trice. So close were they to destruction's edge at this moment of headlong flight. Not till the painted towers encircling Lucerne had come again into sight did the newly wedded pair find words or make the least attempt to speak. Then Carleton kissed his bride, and for a moment love was triumphant. Was it triumphant enough to lead him to acknowledge their marriage? She looked anxiously in his face to see, and finally she asked, "How much of this are we to tell, Carleton?" "All about the catastrophe, but nothing more," he answered. And while her heart retained its homage, the light in her eyes was veiled. Married, but not acknowledged. Would it not have been better if the avalanche had overwhelmed them? She almost thought so, till bending, he murmured in her ear, I shall follow you soon. Do you think I could go on living without you?" "Why so thoughtful, Ermentrude? You are not quite yourself to day." "Uncle is very ill. The doctors say he may not live a month." "And does that grieve you?" A yes was on her lips, but she did not utter it. Instead, she drew a little ribbon from her breast, on which hung a plain gold ring, and gazing earnestly at this token, she remarked very quietly: "Carleton, have you ever thought that but for this ring no proof remains in all this world of our ever having been married?" "But our hearts know it. Is that not enough?" he asked. "For to day, yes. But when Uncle goes—" His kisses finished the sentence for her, and love resumed its sway. But when alone and wakeful on her pillow, she recalled his look. The sting of her first doubt darted through her uneasy heart, and feeling eagerly after the ring, she tore it from its ribbon and put it on her finger. "It is my right," she whispered. "Henceforth I shall wear it. He loves me too well to quarrel with my decision. Now am I really his wife?" End of Chapter 34, Part 1. The Bud, Then the Deadly Flower, Part 2. Did she see a change in him? Did he come less frequently? Did he stay less long? Was there uneasiness in his eye, coolness, languor? No, no. It was her exacting heart which thus interpreted his look, which counted the days, forgot his many engagements, saw impatience in the quickness with which he corrected her faults in manner or language, instead of the old indulgence which met each error with a smile. Love cannot always keep at fever heat. He, the cynosure of the whole foreign element, had the world at his feet, here as in Lucerne. It needed no jealous eye to see this, while she, well, she had her attractions too, as had been often proved, and with God's help she would yet be a fit mate for him. What she now lacked she would acquire. She would watch these fine ladies who blushed with pleasure at his approach, and when her time of mourning was over, she would astonish him with her graces and her appearance. For she knew how to dress, yes, with the best of them, and hold her head and walk like a queen she would feel herself to be when once she bore his name. Patience, then, till she had stored her mind and learned the ways he was accustomed to in others. She had money enough now that her uncle was dead, and she could do things. Yes, but something had gone out of her face, and the ring hung loose on her finger. And he? Had her fears read him aright? Had he grown indifferent, or was he simply perplexed? Let us watch him as he paces his hotel room one glorious afternoon, now stopping to reread a letter he held in his hand, and now to gaze out with unseeing eyes to where the blue of the sea melts into the blue of the sky on the far horizon. Love had been sweet, but man has other passions, and he is in the grip of one of the mightiest in men of his stamp, that all-engrossing, all-demanding one of personal ambition. Without solicitation, without expectation even, a hand had been held out to him whose least grasp meant success in the one field most to his mind, a political career under auspices which had never been known to fail. But there were conditions attached, conditions which a year before would have filled him with joy, but which now stood like a barrier between him and his goal, unless... But he was not ready to disavow his wife, trample upon her heart, nay, on his own as well, that is, without a struggle. For the third time he read the letter, which you will see was from his mother. My son, I have an apology to make and a bit of good news to give you. When I urged you to give up Lucy and to seek distraction abroad, I felt that I was doing justice to your immaturity and saving you from ties which might very easily jeopardize your future happiness. But I have lately changed my mind. In seeing more of her, I have not only learned her worth, but the advantage such a woman would be to one of your tastes and promise. And she loves you more devotedly, perhaps, than you have loved her. How do I know this? Let me tell you of an interview I had with a certain relative of hers last night. I allude to her brother, and for a recognized boss, buried out of sight in politics, he has more heart in his breast than I have ever given him credit for. Not having children of his own, he has centered his affections on this choice little sister of his, and finding her far from happy, came to see me yesterday evening with this proposition. If I would consent to your union with Lucy and withdraw my opposition to your immediate marriage, he would take your future in charge and put you in the way of political advancement, only to be limited, as he says, by your talents, which he is good enough to rate very high. After this, how can I do otherwise than bid you follow your impulses and marry Lucy, in spite of the disparity of years to which I have hitherto taken exception? Were she as poor as she is accounted rich, I should say the same. Now that I have sounded the depths of her lovely disposition and the rare culture of a mind which even those 7 years have enriched beyond what is usual even in women of intellect, her money does not influence me in her favor, nor does it weigh with me in my present opinion of her complete fitness for the position you are so eager to give her. That this will make you happy, I know. Let it hasten your return, which cannot be too speedy. This was the bombshell which had disturbed Carleton Roberts' complacency, bared his own soul to this horrified view, and revealed to him the weakness of his moral nature, which he had hitherto considered strong. For his first impulse was one of recoil, not only from the secret marriage which shut him off from these new hopes, but from his youthful bride as well. He found himself weary of his flowery bonds, and eager for a man's life in his native city. Oh, why had he urged this immature girl to take the ride which had led him into slavery to one who could not advance him in life, however queen-like she moved and talked and smiled upon the world from the heights of her physical perfections? It was brain that was needed, an understanding like Lucy's, tempered, like hers, by years, not months, of culture and refined association. It was at this point he paused in his restless walk and looked for inspiration to the far-off waters of the bluest of all seas. Suddenly he resumed his walk, then quickly stopping again, sat down at his desk with an air of desperate haste, began to write to his mother the announcement: "It is too late. Unfortunately for your scheme, I am already—" He never got any further. A fresh impulse drove him into the streets. He could not thus summarily settle his future fate. It meant too much to him. He must take time to think. His heart clamors loudly for its rights. He is only 26, and in a rush of feeling which should have been his salvation, he turned toward the nest among the flowers where help was to be had, if help was to come at all, in this crisis of conflicting passions. The hour was noon, one which he had never chosen for a visit to Ermentrude. Would he find her in? Would she be in spirits to meet him? Would she look beautiful, worthy of his name, worthy of the greatest sacrifice a man can make for a woman? He half hoped that she would, that he would find his chains riveted and secure beyond the power of any force to break. As his musings faltered, he turned the knob of the little side door and went in. As he did so, a shower of rose leaves fell upon him from the vines enveloping the balcony. He shuddered slightly and passed down the hall. Everything was very still. She was asleep, lying on a couch in utter weariness or pain. She had drifted off into the land of dreams, and he felt that he had a moment of respite. He could look and weigh the question: love or a quick success, a weakling's paradise or the goal of the strong man. Meanwhile, she was not as beautiful as he thought, but she was more touching, less robust, less bounteous of aspect, more childlike, more appealing, a woman who, if he were no more of a man than he appeared to be in this hurly-burly of pleasure and fashion, might in time do him credit and hold him back from follies. But he was not just the man these casual friends and admirers considered him. There was much more to him than that. He knew this better than Lucy did, or her powerful brother, or even his adoring mother. Great opportunities awaited him, and a large space in the affairs of men, if not of nations. Such confidence did he feel in himself at this fevered moment that he never doubted that eventually he would gain all this, even with the handicap of a good-looking but unsophisticated wife. But not quickly, step by step perhaps, and he was longing to take it all at a bound. Poor girl! And she lay there under his eyes, all unmindful of his conflict, or of the fact that her fate as well as his was trembling in the balance, unmindful though her dreams were, far from joyous, or why the tear welling from between her lashes as he gazed. She was alone in the house. He knew it by the complete silence. He could look and study her every feature without fear of interruption. Wait for her waking and be ready to meet her first glance of tender astonishment which might restore him to his better self. Drawing up a chair, he sat down, then started upright again with dilating eyes and a strange shadow on his brow. One of her arms lay uppermost, and on the hand, almost as fine as Lucy's but not quite, he saw the ring, his ring, and it hung loosely. The poor child was growing thin, very thin. If she were to hold her hand downward, he muttered to himself, I believe the ring would fall off. Did some stray glimpse of his own features, wearing a look never seen on them before, confront him from some nearby mirror, that he started so guiltily as his heart murmur rose to his lips? Or was it at a thought, hideous but tempting, which held him, gained upon him, and soon absolutely possessed him, till his own hand went out stealthily and with hesitations toward those helpless fingers of hers, now approaching, now withdrawing, and now approaching them again, but not touching them, great as his impulse was to do so, for fear she should wake, while yet the devil gripped his arm and lit up baleful fires in his eyes. He remembered those words of hers. Have you ever thought that with the exception of this ring, no proof exists in all the world of our ever having been married? Remember them? He had not remembered them. He had heard them, sounding and resounding in his ears, till the whole room seemed to palpitate with them. Then the devil made his final move. Ermentrude shuddered, and her position changing, the hand which had been uppermost fell down at her side, and the ring slipped, left her finger, paused on the edge of the couch, then came to rest in his palm, held out to receive it. He had not drawn it from her hand. Fate had restored it. As he forced himself to look at it lying in his grasp, a faintness as death seized and held him for a moment. Then this passed, and he slowly rose, and step by step, with sidelong looks and hair standing upright on his forehead, like one who has walked in blood and sees the trail of guilt following him along the floor, he left her side, he left the room, he left the house, and the rose leaves fell about him once more, maddening him with their color, maddening him with the memories inseparable from their sweetness, a sweetness which spoke of her, of love, and the attachment of a true heart, destined to grieve for a little while at least, for he was never going back, never, never. There was no eye to see, no tongue to tell him that speed, destined to flower into awful crime some dozen or more years later, put forth its first bud at this fatal hour. He wrote her a letter. He had the grace to do that. Addressing her simply as Ermentrude, he told her that he had been called home to enter upon the serious business of life, that he was not likely to come back, and as she was not really his wife, however pleasing the fiction had been in which they had both indulged, it seemed to him wiser to end their happy romance thus suddenly, while much of its glamour remained, than to linger on and see it decay day by day before their eyes till nothing but bitterness remained. He loved her, and he felt the wrench more than she did, but duty and his obligations as a man, etc., etc., till it ended in his signature limited to initials like his love. Despicable! The work of a man without conscience or heart. Yes, and he knew it, and for weeks his sleep was broken by visions, and his waking hours rendered dreadful by fears. How had she taken this cool assumption that the ceremony performed in the path of the snow was voided by lack of proof? To whom had she ascribed the loss of her ring, and what must she think of him? He had left Nice almost immediately, but wherever he went, in whatever hotel he stayed, or through whatever street he passed, he was always expecting to see her figure rise up before him in the majesty of innocence and outraged love. Thus several weeks passed, and seeing nothing of her, hearing nothing from her, a different apprehension darkened his days and despoiled him of rest at night. Grief, if not shame, had killed her, and the weight of her fancied doom lay heavy on his heart. At last he could bear it no longer, and stealing back to Nice, he entered it one dark night and prepared to learn for himself what he feared to trust to the discretion of another. Alone, with hidden face and heavily throbbing heart, he trod the familiar ways and encircled the familiar walls. Had she been there? But the windows were blank and the place desolate, and he fled the spot and the town, with his questions unasked and his fears unallayed. In 2 days he had sailed for home. With the ocean between them, he might forget, and in time he did. As week followed week, and the silence he had half trusted, half feared, remained unbroken, his equanimity gradually returned, and he prepared to face the prospect of his new marriage much as a man who watches for a dreaded door to open moves with restored confidence about his affairs when at last convinced that the door is padlocked and the key lost. One precaution, and one only, he was wise enough to take. He told his story to Lucy's brother, and left it to him to say whether or not he should marry his sister. And the answer was yes, that if trouble came, he would see him through it. A marriage which could not be proved was no marriage. And as for anything else, Lucy's happiness must not be sacrificed to a boy's peccadilloes. What were a few wild oats sown by a man of his promise? And was this the end? Did Ermentrude accept her doom without a struggle? Let us see. One afternoon in June there entered the parlor of the old-fashioned mansion of the Roberts family a lady who had asked to see Mrs. Roberts on business of an important nature. Though plainly clad, her appearance possessed an elegance which insured respect. But when alone and seated in the darkest corner of the great drawing-room, she put up a trembling hand to thrust back her veil. The countenance thus revealed betrayed an emotion hardly in keeping with the quiet bearing with which she had advanced under the servant's eye. His home, and these the surroundings amid which he had grown to manhood. Why should the sight of all this rouse emotions she believed eliminated by a treachery most cruel in the face of promises most sacred? Why, as she looked about and noted object after object which must have been there previous to his birth, did she see him as a child and a boy, and not as the man who had first won and then deserted her? She would not have had it so at this hour when strength was needed rather than tenderness. But she could not help her nature, or still the wild surgings of her rebellious heart, as his portrait, seen upon the wall, challenged her constancy and whispered of the hour when his forever echoed her forever, and the compact for eternity was sealed. He had broken this compact, broken it soon, broken it before the honeymoon had passed. But she, was she to show no firmer spirit, whose love was of soul and took no note of time? She was his wife, and acknowledged or unacknowledged, must yet prove to be his blessing, though he. But this would not do. The interview before her called for calmness. She would not add to the turbulence of her spirits by another glance at what brought back too much of the past to fortify her for the impending struggle. She had to do credit to his choice, to impress a difficult woman with her dignity as a wife. She must not shake or weep. Yet when she heard a step at the door, instinct told her to pull down her veil till the first greetings were over, a precaution for which she was deeply grateful when, in another moment, a young woman entered instead of her husband's mother, for whom she had asked, and whom she naturally expected to see. In the humiliation of the moment, her disappointment took words, and she muttered within herself, "A companion, or possibly a relative. I am to be put off with kindly excuses, beg to state my errand, rehearse my claims and my hopes to some gentle go-between. I have not the strength for that. I must see the mother, the mother. God give me wisdom and keep me calm, calm." Meanwhile, the young woman she had instinctively called gentle advanced into the center of the room. Mechanically, Ermentrude rose to meet her, and thus stepped into a better light. Tragedy came with her. This was impossible not to see, not to feel. But the warning which her aspect gave passed as she spoke and said in tones a little tremulous, perhaps, but with an air of perfect courtesy, "I had hoped to see Mrs. Roberts herself." The smile with which this was greeted, the flush of pride and the joy of possession which lit the other's pleasing features as she replied, "I am Mrs. Roberts," should have carried the truth to Ermentrude. But they did not. She looked surprised, baffled, and after the briefest hesitation observed, "I am a stranger in this city, and have doubtless made some mistake. The Mrs. Roberts I have called to see, and I was told she lived here, is the mother of a gentleman of the name of—" She could not speak it, but the other could. "Carleton?" she asked, and at Ermentrude's agitated nod, added with friendly interest, "This is her home, but she has left it for a while to us. I am Mr. Carleton Roberts' wife. There are blows which prostrate, and there are others which sear but leave the body intact. Feet still supporting it, eyes still gazing ahead unmoved, lips moving with mechanical exactness, and sometimes still retaining their smile. Only the soul which gave life to all of this is dead. The image is there, but the spirit is gone, and if sufficiently preoccupied, the one who struck the blow sees no change. So it was with Ermentrude and Lucy. "We are looking for mother to return next week," added the latter, as Ermentrude stood stark and silent before her. "Would you like to leave a message for her?" At these words, uttered with the sweetness of a rich and sympathetic nature, the soul returned to Ermentrude's body. With a long and earnest look, which took in the full measure of the other's personality, radiant with happiness and the consciousness of an assured wifedom, she answered softly, "No, I will leave no message," and turned as if to go. "Nor any name?" queried Lucy, eyeing with admiration the noble lines of a figure whose perfect proportions her own could never hope to compete. "Nor any name," came back in indescribable accents from the doorway. Lucy paused, and gazing in vague trouble after her rapidly disappearing visitor, murmured to herself, "Who is she?" But the one who could have answered her was gone. "Carleton, you seldom see such a woman. Younger than I, she had the poise of a woman of 30. Who could she have been?" "Describe her." "I wish I could. I hardly saw her face. It was her figure, her voice, her way of moving and holding herself. I felt as small and quiet as a little mouse beside her. Only I was happy and she was not. That much I feel now that I recall her look in leaving." "Was she an American or foreign?" he asked, hiding his trouble, for a great fear had seized him. "She had an English accent which added very much to her charm." "Forget her." For a moment his accent was almost fierce. Then he laughed the matter off, assuring this bride of a month that she made him cross with her self-depreciation, that there was no one of a finer mien and manner than herself, the chosen of his heart, upon whom he always looked with pride. Which subtle tribute to what was her greatest charm accomplished its end. She did forget the stranger. But he did not. He knew what was before him and prepared himself for the inevitable meeting which would be followed by what? Not by what he had every right to expect, and evidently did. Ermentrude had learned all she would both of his marriage and of the woman who had supplanted her, and had made her resolve. This he saw as they came together in the isolation of a quiet corner of the park, and so was not greatly surprised, though a little moved, as after the first few words, and with an earnest look, she said: "I am your wife, I, Ermentrude Roberts, married to you in the sight of God and man. I cannot prove it, but as you once said, our hearts know it and will continue to know it as long as either of us live. But I am not going to obtrude my claims upon you, Carleton, or stand like a specter in your path. Had this woman you have deceived been weak or foolish or unloving, or indeed anything but what she is, I might have held to my rights and insisted upon a recognition which would have profited you in the end. But I cannot shame that woman. I can neither shame her nor bring her to grief. You have broken one heart, but you shall be saved the remorse of breaking two. I had rather suffer myself. I am alone in the world. I have means. I can ultimately be useful, and face good men and women without fear. Why then should I drag down to the dust one as innocent as myself, or take from you what may make you the man I once thought you and hope to see you again? But that I may have strength for this and for all the sacrifices it involves, you must declare here and now, in this open park where we stand, with no one within sight, much less within hearing, that I am your wife." "You are my wife." "It is enough. Now I can say what otherwise could never have left my lips. I love you, Carleton, love you to eternity as I promised, but I shall never seek you again, and you can go on your way unperturbed. I have consolations here," laying her hand on her breast. "It will no longer be my portion to watch your face for signs of falling regard. What I have is mine, and that is the undying memory of 2 months of perfect happiness." She would have said more, but she saw that he had been greatly shaken. She feared the renewal of a flame not yet altogether extinct in a heart which once beat for her alone, and so contenting herself with a low farewell, she was turning swiftly away when one last thought made her pause and say: "I cannot return your ring. It is lost. I was careless with it, and it fell unnoticed from my hand. But to-night I will send you back the little clock which unites our initials. Destroy it if you will, but if some sentiment bids you keep it, let it be this one and no other. I recall Ermentrude only that I may be faithful to Lucy." With a low cry his head fell upon his breast. in extreme self-abasement. Then he slowly lifted his eyes, and seeing in her face a full knowledge of his sin, murmured in overwhelming shame and contrition: "You know me for the wretch I am. I have the ring. It fell from your hand into mine one day while you lay asleep. I do not ask for forgiveness, but this I promise you, Ermentrude: if that little clock comes back, I will make a place in it for this ring, and neither clock nor ring shall leave me again while I live." Instinctively her hands went out to him, then they fell back on her breast. "God will hold you to that promise," she said, and melted away from his sight in the mist which had been gradually enveloping them without being seen by either. Thus the struggle ended for him, which for her had simply begun. Not till she found herself in the South with her girl friend, Antoinette Duclos, that she discovered the closest bond which can unite man and woman held her in spite of her late compact with Carleton Roberts. Should she reassert her rights and demand that the father should recognize his child? Her generous heart said no. The old arguments held good. She appealed to Antoinette for advice. The result we know. When Antoinette's own child died at birth, she took Ermentrude's to her heart and brought it up as her own. There was little difficulty in this, as the Professor had already yielded to a Southern fever and lay at rest in a New Orleans cemetery. And this brings us to another episode. The widow in fact and the widow in heart stood face to face above a sleeping infant. They were both dressed for traveling, and so was the babe. The dismantled rooms showed why. Young still, for the years of either's romance had been few, each face, as the other contemplated it, told the story of sorrow which time, for all its kindliness, would never efface. But the charm of either remained, perceptible at this hour, as perhaps it would never be again to the same extent. Antoinette basked in the light of Ermentrude's beauty, ennobled by renunciation, and Ermentrude in that wonderful look in her friend's plain face, which came at great crises and made her for the moment the equal of the best. They had said little, and they said little now, as is the way of the strong amongst us when an act is to be performed which wrings the heart but satisfies the conscience. The child was legitimate. It must not grow up under a shadow. To ensure its welfare and raise no doubt in its own mind, as it grew in knowledge and feeling, the two women must separate. No paltering with his duty, and no delay. A month of baby cries and baby touches might weaken the real mother. It should be now. It should be today. But first, a final word, a parting question. It was uttered by Ermentrude. "You will go back to France?" "Yes, I can easily live there. And you, Ermentrude?" "To New York. I shall never be far from him, but he and I will never meet. My world will not be his world. I shall make my own place." "As Ermentrude Taylor?" "As Mrs. Ermentrude Taylor. I am a wife. I shall never forget that fact." "And the child? Will you never come to see it?" Ermentrude's head fell, and she stood a long time without answering. Then, with a steady look, she calmly said: "I can think of but one contingency which might shake my resolution to leave her yours without the least interruption from me. If he, Antoinette, if he were left alone and childless, I might see my duty differently from now. You must be prepared for that." "Ermentrude, when you send me this little shoe, see, I will leave one on and give you the other. I shall know that you are coming, or that you want the child. My life is yours as I once promised. And do you think I would hold back the child?" Again their hands met, as once before, in that strong clasp which means, "Trust me to the death and beyond it." With Antoinette it was to the death, as we have seen. Warned by Ermentrude of the appalling result of their plan to bring father and child together, and entreated to fly lest her story should imperil the secret upon the preservation of which his very life now hung, she answered to the call as she had promised, and thus acquitted her debt, though she failed to save him. Of her previous act in disfiguring his photograph in her temporary lodging place we shall never know the full story. The picture had been hers for years, given her by Ermentrude on their parting, so that the child should not be without some semblance of her father, even if she should not know him as such. And it was to secure this clue to their now doubly dangerous secret that Madame Duclos ransacked her baggage previously to her flight from the New York hotel. But whether its destruction in the peculiar manner we know was the result of simple precaution or of a feeling of antagonism so strong against this destroyer of her beloved's peace that it had to be expended in some way before she felt strong enough for that supreme sacrifice in his favor toward which events seemed hurrying her, may be known in eternity, but will never be told in time. And Ermentrude, what of her? Alone, robbed of husband and child and friend, where shall we look for her in this world of extreme tribulation? Search the hospitals of France, where they press closest to the trenches. There you will find the woman who, losing all, has found much. Blessing and blessed, the angel of the battlefield whom the bullets spare, since her work on earth is not yet accomplished. End of chapter 34, part 2. End of book 4. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. End of the mystery of the Hasty Arrow by Katharine Green.